I can't see you.
I am here. I am here.
I'm here. That's main thing. Okay.
Okay, give it a second.
1 second. Play around a wee bit with this one. There we go. We're in a box.
Can you see me? Can you see me now?
I can't see you now. No.
It's all, it says your name is there, but you're all black.
I'm all black. Okay, I've gone shadow. I've gone into the darkness. Oh, that's. Do you know why? Do you know what that is? Because I turned. Remember, I was saying to you, I sent that file to myself. I turned my internet off on my phone just to try to use my data. There we go.
Oh, she's fixed now. And Owen's decided to run out of the room.
I'm just putting the light on.
Oh yeah, that's grand.
Doesn't make much difference.
Okay, we'll wait for people to slowly come in before we'll have this old full-on argument for the next hour or so. So, gentlemen, how are you keeping? How are we doing tonight? Any news, Richie?
I'm good.
Are you live? Well, I think I'm live anyway. Am I live, Kevin? Can you hear me?
I might check my internet, my channel, see if we're live.
I'm just about alive after I brought my daughter to the she was playing in the Kerry County under-16s final last night. And there's a pitch in Killarney, there's a club, and it has two pitches. One has a stand, lovely stand, especially when it's pouring rain. Unfortunately, where they put the lights, there's no stand, there's no protection for anybody. So, and the rain last night was torrential.
So you two show us on. You two show us live, but I don't show us live on my phone.
It's not live. Try to disconnect everything and put everything back up again, I guess. If it's not connect, give us a second. I'll actually have an old gawk over to your channel to see if it's
maybe it's just me. But you two are showing us live.
I am live, yeah. I am live right now. As you can see, we're professionals, I swear. Nah, enjoying hang out. How you keeping? Can you all hear me, no?
I can hear you.
Aye. Well, Owen can hear me. That's the main thing. I couldn't care with the public thing, as long as you can roar at Owen for the next an hour and a half.
Yeah, yeah, how do I, let me see. Yeah, am I live? Have you checked my channel, see if I'm live?
Well, Kevin can hear you anyway. I can, 1 second, I actually have to fly over to your channel. Clans and Dynasties. No, it's not picking up. Try to disconnect everything or at least press live or something. You connected it up to edit channels up on the top.
Yeah, because it's saved on my
I think Owen's lot are coming in. 1 second, I'll check Owen's. If you guys are coming over from Owen's channel there, give the old thumbs up there, will you? We're still connecting.
We'll do thumbs up for Owen's channel, smiley faces for my channel, and sad faces for Philip's channel.
Sad faces.
I've got 2 views.
I see. Well, actually, no, you've jumped up to 13 already. You're flying up, Owen. Everyone's coming in to argue. I think everyone's coming to argue with you, Owen, to be honest with you.
So it says, start sending us your video from your streaming software.
What?
How's
Kevin?
Oh, wait, hang on.
Sorry, Owen.
Sorry,
was that one?
I put a YouTube short up today with just Bronze Age stuff from the museum in Dublin.
Yeah.
And I got into arguments about Egypt.
That's good, though. Oh, Shane Kent is in the house. How's Shane keeping? How's Kevin as well? I was going to say Kevin there, and suddenly, what was it called? So that's Owen's channel fully connected. All the boys from Owen's channel are giving the old thumbs up.
Okay, well, I'm
so
connected.
It's just me causing problems as usual.
Toggle on. It says I'm stream. Right, okay, so it says I'm streaming. Let me refresh. This is all your new fandangle technology, Philip. It's nothing to do with me.
Owen can run it. If Owen can run it, anyone can run it. So I don't know what you're on like.
Did any of you go create, whenever you went into YouTube, did you go create live or go live? Or did it just happen
Onto
automatically?
No,
YouTube.
I just clicked on the link and I'd set it up last week, so it was fine. And then in the top right hand corner, there's two buttons. One says leave, and I click the one beside that, and you throw in your channel, and that's it.
Yeah, I've got that. It's because it says stream. It says I'm streaming, but hang on, let me go into edit, public. Okay, we'll just.
When it says it's streaming, maybe it's connected to the other one you were using the other day.
No, it's it's not connected to my OnlyFans. Let me see if last ditch attempt. Okay. Okay, it does say. It says I can manage the stream. So hang on. It says I'm live now, so we'll see what happens. We'll see if it kicks in. If it doesn't, then
you can tip away in the background. Tip away on it in the background. You'll just be lost to the conversation.
Just someone else. Can you? I don't know. Just someone else. Just again double check to see if they're seeing it.
Just 1 second. I'll fly over to it. We're just sorry about this, guys. We're just checking. Oh, Michal, you are live. We're live right now.
Okay, I fixed it.
Yeah.
Don't worry, I'm a magician.
You're up and running now.
You're a druid.
I'm a druid. Well, as long as no one called Patrick comes and genocides me.
Right. What was going to blast you'd say? Yeah. People in the comment section want to know what we're talking about today. We're going to start a big argument, depending on who's in the comment section today, because for a very long time, myself, Owen, and Michal have had the same problem over and over again, and that is the Christianization of the island of Ireland, going from the 5th century all the way up to around the 11th century, just before the reforms of the church in Ireland with the Gregorian reform. And it's the same stupid comments that pop up again and again and again, which make out that St. Patrick came to the island of Ireland and then he committed a great, deletion of the pagan people, if I can say that on YouTube without getting demonetized and all that kind of stuff. Well, I'm already demonetized anyway, so I don't have to worry about that. But Michal and Owen probably don't want to get demonetized as well. But yeah, it seems to be just a continuous problem that seems to pop up again and again and again. Would I be right on saying that, lads?
Yeah.
I think I'll let Owen go first. He started.
Yeah, it's around St. Patrick's Day. The thing comes up continually, and what comes up especially is that the legend of St. Patrick expelling the snakes is a metaphor for St. Patrick killing all the druids, because the snakes are supposed to represent druids, because everybody knows that the druids had snake tattoos. And the funniest thing about this is this myth is very new. There was a book, what's it called? The Myths of Avalon. And I'm doing a blank on the author, Marion Zimmer Bradley. It was also in, I think, the early 2000s or late 90s, into a sort of a mini-series. And in her book, she invented, I think she was the one to invent, as far as I know, the idea that druids had snakes, snake tattoos, which makes no sense in Ireland because there were no snakes. And the whole story makes even less sense because the story of St. Patrick expelling the snakes is much, much later than St. Patrick. Giraldus Cambrensis is one of the first to report it. So that's 500, 600 years after St. Patrick. So it's based on 20th century pop culture, but some people are really, really, really attached to it. You can go to social media and throw in St. Patrick's, snakes, pagan, genocide, and be very surprised at what you come up with. But it is generally something I find annoying. And I just find it bizarre that anybody still believes in this myth.
Yeah, it just seems.
You there?
Yeah, I'm here.
No, I just heard he went. Philip went, yeah, it seems, and then just sort of
Yeah.
went quiet.
And
Oh
actually,
yeah. Go
there's
ahead.
someone else who knows of the book, Mists of Avalon. Vini Deseret Atlantis Marset, fitting in as many references as possible.
I think with
the book.
Yeah, without going too into it, I know other academics like Howard Williams he's a Cambridge professor, but he does a lot of stuff on TikTok, and he's sort of gone into
Archaeodeath, I think his name.
Archaeodeath is we're mutuals, so I hope you won't mind me throwing his name out there. But he's mentioned often about the sort of the rise of neo-paganism. And the also the idea of claiming victim. There's a trend of claiming victimhood. You know, who's the biggest victim in history? And you have all these people. Normally from European sort of descent, people who would sort of try to, when there are other groups in the world who are sort of exposing their victims, being victims to such things as genocides or just general, racist policies or whatever. Just this is a broad spectrum, and I'm not singling out a specific group. But what I'm saying is that there seems to be an inherent sort of reflex from maybe the side who are known to be the aggressors to claim a victimhood of their own to justify or to water down their own sort of group's involvement in a certain event, shall we say. So, and I think this has sort of bled into this idea of Irish paganism, and they needed something to sort of say, well, if it wasn't for Christianity, I would have the same religion as my forebears, and therefore they because there was a great genocide stuff. I think it's almost an attempt to claim a victimhood status for an event that didn't really happen, but they've clutched at a small myth and ran with it.
It's just to say there it's funny because you have a weird, at times, confluence between neo-paganism, especially in the States, and evangelical ideas about this sort of stuff. They come together and massacre Irish history. And because most of what people say they know about Irish paganism is wrong. Most of it is very, very new. Saint Bridget was a saint, was a human person, and only became a Celtic goddess at the beginning of the 20th century. But there is evidence about pagan or pre-Christian beliefs that you can find out there if you look at it. Like the Paps of Anu in Kerry, Crum in Limerick, certain rivers, there's stuff out there, but that is generally ignored. And then another problem I have with some neo-pagans is why they think praying to a god or goddess in English, well, why will their prayers be accepted by sort of gods who the last time they were worshipped in a much, much earlier form of Irish, which a native Irish speaker now would have difficulty to understand.
Yeah, definitely. It's
Maybe they were colonized too.
yeah, it always goes back to that one. Just popping up to the comment section there because there's a few good ones popping up there. Not sure about the first one here, but Shane Kent is bringing up some very, very good comments there. The snake's also linked to the likes of the Greeks' healing god, which is popular in Turkey. And then he elaborates on that with he is often depicted with the snake linked with healing and regeneration. Shane Kent, can you elaborate still further on that one? Because I'm not sure how that's connected from Greece over to Ireland. Is there a
I
connection there
don't
as
think
well?
it's connected directly to Ireland, but I think there is an image of a star. I think it's supposed to be an image of a what you would call it, a doctor in Roman times or Greek times. There's a
Oh yeah.
staff, and then there's two snakes on either side. I
Mm,
know it's sometimes used in modern medicine, but I think people, not Shane, but I think what he's referring to is I think people took the idea of snakes. Maybe Marion Zimmer Bradley, that's where she got the idea of the snakes from.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there is a connection. There is early testament to as Christianity sort of came into Ireland in and in the 7th century. There's a reference to sort of Greek writings making their way into Ireland,
Mm,
although it's often overemphasized and exaggerated about how much of the populace was speaking Greek. But there was definitely that sort of from the wider Roman world of Greek coming into Ireland. And then eventually again, there's another reference of whenever the Normans sort of came across to Ireland, we kind of gained access to more of the literacy of the world, including more Greek. And if you're saying if Gerald Compensius is one of the influences behind the snake myth, it could be that those two sort of pathways are linked with as more Greek sort of influences are coming into our literature, that maybe it's just latched on. There are stories of St. Patrick performing miracles, and one of them is healing. So this is speculation on my part. I haven't done any research on the specific thing, but I'm just saying that we can sort of see two things happening simultaneously that could sort of answer that, possibly if someone was to research further. But maybe that's where the Greek influence comes from. But that is just my 2 pence without doing any research on that specific point. So if anyone wants to add or just completely defeat that in the comment section, please go ahead.
Just
yeah.
in relation to the Greek influence, there has been research done looking at what classical works got translated into Irish by monks at the time. A lot of Latin stuff, not much Greek. For example, the War of Troy. What got translated into Irish was not Homer, but a Roman version of it. I can't remember the name of the poet who did it, but so the Irish monks were not reading too much Greek. They were reading a lot of Latin, and I think that the Homer and the Troy story fed into, I think, maybe Cuchulainn, but through Latin.
Yeah, like I say, I know it's the Greek is often overstated how much Greek was coming in, but yeah, I do know that like I say, I don't know of any specific sources off the top of my head, but I'm pretty sure I read in like 634 there was something to do with Greek, and that number is coming to my head. But like I say, I know it's over the estimates are over inflated of how much Greek was coming into Ireland. But there's bound to have been, obviously, because it's part of the wider Roman world.
Another important point is that Irish monks, etc., they were very, very well versed in the Bible
Yeah.
and in Christian stories. So they would read about snakes. And what they often did in stories of St. Patrick, they look at stories about other saints, about miracles, about bad things that happened to them, about good things that happened to them. And they essentially translate transpose these miracles, etc., to Ireland. So when, like many people who say, like they base their idea of this non-existent pagan genocide on stuff that's written about St. Patrick 200 years later, when the writers are attacking Druids. But what these books are actually doing is taking stuff from completely different historical contexts and throwing it into Ireland.
Yeah, it's interesting. All right, and it kind of elaborates a wee bit into the next slide I'm going to have up there in a second, which is were there really even pagans though? If we get back to just the main sources, because we kind of ran over to like the 7th century and stuff, and we didn't really elaborate on the actual St. Patrick himself there. And actually, we do have 2 letters to prove that St. Patrick is real. Allegedly, I know there's other people who would dispute these 2 letters. However, we have 2 books. In the book of, what was it, the Annals of Ulster, isn't it? Sorry, no, the Book of Armagh. We have the 2 letters from St. Patrick, which is the letter to the soldiers of Critias and also the Confessio. And in this, both 2 of these letters are allegedly written by the real St. Patrick himself. And they kind of give us more of a good insight of what life was allegedly like in the 5th century. And here we do not see in any of these letters, to be quite honest with you, I can't see a very kind of genocidal St. Patrick, to be quite honest with you. In fact, I see the complete opposite when reading these 2 letters. I actually feel very sorry for this man who had to go from Britain over to Ireland and then take this very, very difficult road ahead of him, which was try to convert a very pagan Ireland into Christianity. And it definitely doesn't paint the image that a lot of people have if they're getting this image from the 7th century or later texts all the way up to the 21st century and stuff. I can't see that image when reading these 2 letters, which to me, if you're going to talk about St. Patrick, you have to read these 2 letters to even start with. What do you think about that, gentlemen?
I think just to start with the most essential point, what you said at the end is completely necessary.
Yeah.
You can't talk about this without looking at the actual sources. So we can't talk about St. Patrick without reading St. Patrick's letters, and they are essentially the earliest Irish history that we have. Irish history begins with them. Before that, it's pre-history because there's nothing written. There's lots of archaeology. You could say there is some history written by Tacitus and other Romans, but St. Patrick marks the beginning of history in Ireland, and those things are essential, and they are completely different to what's the name of. There's a bishop who wrote about 200 years later a life of St. Patrick, which is completely different, and it's written for a political point of view.
Is it Avenant or the other? You've got Avenant and the other.
I think characters. That's the one.
Sorry.
I would also recommend, I gave it to you in the sources, listening. There's the Irish Medieval History podcast. It's from people in Maynooth. They have an interview about St. Patrick with a guy. He was publishing a blog called Vox Hypernicum, where he goes into great detail talking about St. Patrick based on St. Patrick's writings. And I challenge anyone to listen to that podcast, to read his stuff, and then continue to advocate there was a genocide. Because these guys know their stuff, and they know their early Irish, and they know their Latin.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think not only do we, although the history of Ireland will use that statement that starts at St. Patrick, the history of Christianity in Ireland does not start with St. Patrick. And that is also another point that sort of, I think, almost debunks the myth of a genocide when you realize how Christianity really came to Ireland. If you focus on the narrative that St. Patrick came across, converted the women and the outcasts and eventually the nobility, then it's easy to sort of come up with, start building a picture of this myth that exists of genocide. But when you actually really look at how Christianity arrived in Ireland, and the complex process involving various channels, starting way before the official missions in Ireland, you can start to see that actually it's not plausible for there to have been a genocide, because this is not just a single individual coming in and putting his beliefs on. We have Christianity coming through introduction of trade before St. Patrick exists. We have the south of Munster having close links with Gaul. We have the Leinster having close links with Britain. This is a trade of goods, knowledge, including Christianity, slaves, which some of them would have been Christian, as we know from Patrick's narrative. Whether you believe that his story is fabricated or not is irrelevant. We know that slavery existed in Ireland, and we know that Christian slaves were among those. We also know that possibly Scotti troops were being used as soldiers within Marcus Aurelius Carausius, his forces in Londinium. There's a possible link there of them taking Christianity back as well. And now that's a bit more conjecture, but we know that Irish soldiers are being used in Roman forces, or at least interacting with Romans beyond trade. So, there's a lot of ways Christianity was already starting to exist in the space of Ireland before Patrick came across. In fact, one of the reasons for Patrick, coming across as a missionary, was the belief that Palladius was Palladius was brought across because we needed a diocese for the already Christian communities that existed already. So, again, going by the traditional narrative of St. Patrick's sort of confessio, and taking that verbatim, and again, that sort of goes full circle to what you're saying, that we need to read his work and use his work as evidence, but we also need to use a bit more context and realizing who he's writing to and who he's writing about and why he's writing what he's writing, and why he omits some things and adds others. So I think if you take all that into consideration, you get a better idea of actually what is happening in Ireland.
Yeah, definitely. You do have to see the bigger picture. All right, just to fly over to the comment section again, just to have the interaction going here, guys. If you believe that St. Patrick did wipe out the pagans, could you please give us a source? Because that's what we're here to talk about today. Because I've gone through all the literature, and to be quite honest with you, I can't find anywhere so far in all my research where I could find any evidence to support this kind of argument. So if you're in the comment section and you believe in this type of stuff, please give me the references to this, because I just can't find it, to be quite honest with you. We'll just pop over and go through some of these comments here as well. And also on top of that as well, when I'm going off to find some of this research and stuff as well later on, can you guys give the dates and the name of these finds as well? Because I am interested in a lot of this kind of stuff, so I would love to see more of this kind of stuff, to be quite honest with you. And
Caveman's just said there about the Fermanagh apparently are a Celtic tribe, the Manapai who immigrated to Ireland during the Roman conquest of Gaul. I have a suspicion, now it's not on what he's saying, but I have a suspicion the very individual, hopefully Shane Kent's here, that Marcus Aurelius Carausius was of the Manapai. I have a really not of the branch that supposedly migrated to Ireland, but of the Gallic group, which would be very interesting if that is true, and we could prove that link. Maybe that's another link to Ireland that he would possibly have that would support that. But it's just
I I wanted to make a point to what Michael was saying a little earlier, talking about links to the Romans, etc. I think in Irish history for the last few hundred years, we have overtaught the idea that Ireland is an island behind an island. Since the Bronze Age, the Irish Sea and also the other seas, they have been roads, they have been means of transport, means of communication, sort of between Ireland, between Britain, between Ireland, France, or Gaul, if you prefer, between Iberia. It is this fantastic way, and all this stuff went both ways. Like you mentioned, Irish taking slaves from Britain, from Britannia, maybe it's better. But the letter to Coroticus, from what I understand, came from somewhere in Britain and captured and took as slaves some of St. Patrick's Christians. So it just shows you there's a two-way flow. And finally, another point that definitely does not fit into this narrative of a genocide. The Iron Age in Ireland is, some people are now starting to call it an Irish Dark Age, because we have fantastic stuff about the Bronze Age. Go to the museum in Dublin and the section on gold, like you go walk straight in, it's there. You'll see all this amazing Bronze Age gold, torques, etc., etc. Beautiful weapons. You have, stone circles, a lot of stuff. Suddenly the Iron Age comes, and they know from pollen counts and excavations, the population was going down because there's less farmland being used. Something bad happened for a while. And then when Ireland Christianizes, or better, starts to Christianize, things economically, the country turns around, the population starts to grow. That's why I think from the 6th century on, 7th century, there's suddenly loads of ring forts because the population was growing. There was a big turnabout in the economic, probably social and political structure of Gaelic Ireland at that time that came with Christianity. I don't know, I'm not going to say that it was due to Christianity. It could just have been a coincidence. And the fact that Roman Britain was starting to enter, a very turbulent period may have benefited Ireland. But again, it's this bigger picture. You have to sort of move away from small narratives and start looking at other things and seeing Ireland as connected to other things.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you there. And on top of that as well, just getting back into the comment section again so we can get this up and flowing, is the fact that it is true. There is a period that you have an entire transition period going from St. Patrick coming onto the island of Ireland into this kind of transition period of this kind of conversion era. And then it's not a case, to me, it's not a case of it's suddenly becoming a Christian state, that there is a period of, transition period going from paganism into Christianity, that people kind of, because of this kind of genocide narrative, that people have this they expect when, 410 comes, here comes St. Patrick, 436, and then bang, Ireland is Christianized. That's not the case whatsoever. It seems to me, going from around 436 up to 550, that we do in fact have a transition period, especially between the gods and goddesses. Now, Owen, I do find it very interesting that you solidly do believe that there is no connection between, maybe you believe there's a little bit of connection there between St. Patrick and perhaps, a kind of quote unquote Celtic Roman god that we see over in the north of England, Burgundy.
St.
Sorry,
Patrick or Bridget?
say that again.
Are you
St.
talking about St.
Oh yeah, sorry about that. St. Bridget, because I was actually going to use St. Bridget as a kind of what was I going to do with her? St. Bridget, I was kind of going to show people, hey, look, actually, there's a transition period here where we have the kind of Celtic Roman god up in the north of England, St. Burgundy's, who's very similar to the goddess that we see over in Kildare, quote unquote, same, the goddess Bridget, and that we see there a transition going from Bridget to the Saint Bridget. No, you were actually bang on right, Dr. Owen O'Neill, in the fact that actually trying to find evidence that there's a connection between Burgundy up in the north of England. No, there's no, in Ireland itself, in Kildare, there is no solid evidence from what we've done so far that there was a goddess Bridget there. I think most of the arguments come from the fact that there is a connection. There perhaps could be a connection between a goddess, the goddess Burgundies that we can find in the north of England, and perhaps Saint Bridget. I think that's mostly the argument people try to go off of. But you're bang on right. So far, there have been so many academics that have actually turned around. This is actually, show me the evidence. Is there any evidence there? But at the same time, I do want to highlight, if it is true that that there is a connection between the earlier Burgundies goddess up in the north of England, and we have Bridget, then in fact this could be a good way to show an example of this kind of conversion era, where it's not a kind of cut and dry, hey look, it's 436, bang, everybody's suddenly Christianized. In fact, there's this whole transition where people in these monastic settlement, well, I suppose religious settlements that are here, that they're slowly converting, they're taking on more and more of these Christian ideas, and they're blurring into Christianity rather than just suddenly becoming Christianized. From my interpretation of what's going on, looking at the finds. Now, it's not until we get up to the 7th century that we start to see literature starting to appear from what we have left from the early medieval period. So there's not even like written evidence, from my understanding, from the 6th century that highlights the fact, hey, look, it's actually a bleeding process. There's not a sudden Christianization, from my interpretation.
Yeah. First of all, someone mentioned, Austria Overseas mentioned Dr. Niamh Wycherley. I'm probably pronouncing her name wrong. She runs the Irish Medieval History podcast, and she's very good. I think she's also a specialist in St. Bridget. And they had a big conference last year. So just about St. Bridget, there's a lot of evidence for St. Bridget, the human person who became a saint, who founded a monastery, etc., etc. There is a couple of throwaway lines, essentially, in one Gaelic work. It's the Shanachas, where some guy, I think writing in the 10th century or 11th century, he's trying to explain the meanings of everything, and he mentions a Bridget, but she would not have been important. This essentially got ignored until the end of the 19th century. Maud Gonne, the muse of Yeats, was one of the first to big up the idea of Saint Bridget. So of the goddess Bridget. The goddess Bridget is essentially a 20th century invention. I think one of the problems is that people have this massive misconception of the pre-Christian religion. If you look at Gaelic Ireland, it's a fragmented political system. Therefore, to me, the pre-Christian religion would have been fragmented as well. And we have a lot of information, quite a bit of information about pre-Christian in Roman Britain, because you have lots of stuff and there's gods everywhere. There's a whole pile of gods. So I think in Ireland there was no church, there was no pagan church. This idea of Druids is a Roman invention. We can come back to Druids in a while. And it's one of the reasons I think that Christianity did very well very quickly, because they presented for the first time an organized church. There was an actual religion, as opposed to lots of different centers of people believing in different things. So there are a few references to Gaelic gods. I mentioned Paps de Anu before, the Paps of the goddess Anu. Crum appears to have been a god. The River Boyne is named after someone. In Tara, there was a Maeve and someone else who were probably Maeve, who may be connected to Maeve of the Taun, Maeve of Rathcrone. There is evidence, but it was a very fragmented system, which meant that Christianity could get to power as such quite quickly. But it also meant exactly what you're saying. It took a long time for it to seep into everybody. And of course, you're not going to find much evidence. You're not going to find churchmen writing saying that these pagans still exist. Because, that would, no one's going to write a bad report about themselves. It's human nature. But I really think it took a long time to filter through.
Yeah, I think you're bang on. The 5th century marked a period of real radical social and technological religious changes in Ireland, and Christianity was preached across the island. And it wasn't. Someone has said there that it wasn't embraced by everyone. So people are bound to have been killed, but there's no evidence. There's no evidence of that. Now, no one's saying that maybe on local level, that some incidents didn't happen. But without the existence of any of this evidence, no graves have been brought up with ritualistic scarring or evidence of it being anything other than something to do with religion. You're in the world of speculation then.
I don't think there was any form of murder between Christians and pagans, to be quite honest with you,
I get that. What I'm trying to say is that I'm not saying that it couldn't happen on an individual level, not a systematic thing of an entire group of people attacking another group of people due to religion. I'm not saying that there wasn't some headbanger from down the road who decided to stick a knife in someone because he felt under threat of his religion.
Yeah.
But what I'm trying to say is that just because individual incidents possibly happened, like I've said, and like you said, there's no evidence of even that. You can't use that to justify any sort of wider argument.
The reason why I kind of disagree with that, to be quite honest with you, Michal, to put you on.
How can you disagree? No. How can you disagree?
I'll explain now why I disagree with the individuals, even, is because of the fact that if you look at the Finn cycle, for example, it shows the kind of blur between paganism and Christianity that's there, and it's seen even at the later points as a very kind of Finn, Irish warrior. Even like the blur is there all the way from what was it called? The Finn cycle that we can see around. I suppose it's not really written down until about the 8th century and stuff. However, it seems to indicate much more earlier sources, perhaps even from the 6th or even earlier to the time of Jesus Christ, that's even pushing it. But anyway, my main point being is that the Finn cycle that's set around the, I suppose, the period of around this, I suppose, the 7th century all the way up to around the 11th century. In that, there's a constant kind of blur between paganism and Christianity. So I don't think it's going to be a case of, he doesn't believe in the Jesus and he believes in.
What about the first synod of St. Patrick in the 6th century? Now, I know before you would go into it, I know it's sort of historians debate. It's like, who was the author and the actual date of it. But it does sort of, show that the pagan society is a distinct group in the 6th century, as in very much a us and them situation. Although, again, I will say this is not evidence of any genocide or anything of the sort. But even like I say, I agree with the syncretism of pagan Ireland and Catholicism. It did it everywhere it went. Christianity would often absorb. We see in Ireland sites, past religious sites, wells all over the country were taken over from possibly pagan sites that became Christian sites. And these are processed over a century, gradualization. My point, though, when I was getting like, how could you argue about it, is that all I said was I wasn't saying that even these individual attacks on an individual level happened. I'm just not I'm not denying they happened, or that they I'm not denying their existence or saying they did happen. I'm just saying that humans are weird. Individuals can be stranger. I'm not denying that if someone digs up a grave in a year's time and says, there you go, this is evidence of a Christian attacking a pagan. then I'm probably just going to turn around and say, that was one guy. Everyone knew Bob down the lane was a lunatic, So,
Well, you do obviously have the freak mergers and stuff, but it's trying to find evidence of that, I'd reckon, would be very, very difficult, given the fact that the warrior class, which is, the Fenian in the mythology and stuff, are constantly in that blur zone, and they never seem to go out. Even when the Vikings come in, we kind of, and I'll talk about that later on as well. Even when the Vikings come in, there's never a kind of, okay, we're going out to attack the Christians. When Vikings are attacking in Ireland, it's there to steal the loot. They're there to take all the loot. They're never going out of their way to attack Christians per se for being Christian. And we see the same thing within the Finn cycle and stuff. They're always, like, the Fenian are always experimenting and playing with pagan beliefs. Even the whole thing around headhunting, the ceremonies around headhunting, from even just the day-to-day stuff that they have going on with them, with the whole kind of connection with wolves and all that kind of stuff, the whole kind of paganism around them and stuff. There's just a massive blur line. There's never a kind of, okay, let's go out there and attack Christians, or vice versa. They're never going out there to attack pagans. So yeah, of course, freaks, incidences like that happen. But the thing is, when it comes,
I think if you look at the work, especially the Confessio of St. Patrick, and read it carefully, you'll see that although we don't know when Christianity started in Ireland, but we know that St. Patrick was in a minority position. So he knew that he was bringing something new, potentially problematic, and he's moving around a bit. He's meeting nobles. He's trying not to antagonize anybody. At whatever you talk about fights between Christian and pre-Christian, under Patrick, no, because he's doing his best to establish his church, his mission, if you like, to stay alive and to keep his legacy alive. He's in no position to start going around and start massacring priests, whatever they're called, of previous religions. And then Christianity starts to grow, and I think it grew fairly fast because due to the lack of unorganized opposition. And then you mentioned the synod. The synod kind of shows that there was still 100 years later, whatever, there still were pagans. There still were a significant number of them, but there had been a change. So the pagans were now the minority, and there were they were starting to kind of discriminate against them, but not. And there must have been fights, but would have been fights between Christians as well and between pagans. Cattle raiding, when you're off to steal stuff from the valley over the mountain, you probably don't care their religion. Maybe a priest will give you some blessing to help you, so you'll pretend you're a crusader for the I can't think of an alternative word. You'll persuade yourself you're going there to plunder this guy for religion.
Yeah, I think I also think that there is a difference between, say, like you said there, Owen, about St. Patrick's mission and the earlier, possibly pre-patrician priests that sort of came across, and in that sort of 5th, 6th century. I do slightly disagree with Philip on the later, with the Norse arriving, when we see in the Bran Saga and the War of the Gael Foreigners, there's definitely a message to portray the Norsemen as ruthless pagans, and there's definitely in the literature, in the annals, they definitely heathens, and there's definitely language that interprets them as us and them, and it's very aggressive language. It's almost like today with how people use messaging. I think it's very similar in that they are portraying an us and them. Now, I will say that the Irish were obviously raiding churches too. The Norse were going out of their way to attack for a Christian against the Christians for the sake of being Christian per se. It was about loot, but at the same time, the Christians are, and I'm pretty sure the Norse did too, but the Christians, we have the evidence, the Christians definitely demonizing these Norse heathens. And one of them is the reason they are so savage and brutal and uncivilized is because they are heathens and they worship their false gods. And we, like I say, just that could be seen in the Bjorn Saga and the War of the Gael of the Foreigners, in that they do portray them in a negative light. And one of the negative tones that they're using to describe them as why they're negative is their anti-Christian beliefs.
Just to add in there, something that you find throughout Christian literature from, say, 300-400 until the end of the Reformation is that people are always, whenever there's a disaster, like the disaster of suddenly the Norse coming out and plundering Lindisfarne, plundering Kells, plundering Iona, or the Irish rebelling and smashing the plantation of Munster or against Ulster, you have these people saying this is the wrath of God because we have sinned. And in that case, the words that you mentioned, heathen, etc., they're important words because they're connected to religious. Because heathen compared to pagan, as someone has mentioned in the comments, it meant kulshi as such.
Yeah.
Someone who didn't live in the town, wasn't civilized, a bogman. Heathen is, someone who rejects the word of God. They're not just, the guy down the road there, and they're carrying a sword, and they're coming to do Satan's work or whatever.
That's why I think that the argument is slightly different. But don't get me wrong, I do understand there is evidence of mutual pragmatism for working together. Like Philip will mention Cork is a great example, an area down in Cork with a monastic site and a Norse settlement nearby. So there is obviously a mutual, but it's just but that was just I feel that they're interpreted.
But the problem I have with that interpretation is the fact that the Finns, the Finn warriors, are also considered heathens as well. And it's the same thing with the Gael Gael. The Gael Gael, the Irish Vikings, are also branded as even the worst heathens of all because, as you guys pointed out there, they should know better. If you look at the book of Ushraga, for example, God, I can't remember the official name of the book, but it lists, the Danes, the Norwegians, and at the very bottom, it's the Gael Gael. The Gael Gael are considered the worst ones of all because they're educated in Christ, and yet they reject him in his actions. And it's the same. The Gael Gael and the Fenian, because of that blur in reality, that we see around the southeast of the island of Ireland, because the word Gael Gael first appears up around the Munster region, with no surprise there, because that's where the earliest areas where you start to see Norse start to settle around the place. So you start to get this whole kind of quote unquote Viking culture starting to settle around the southeast area. So it's no surprise that the word Gael Gael starts to appear around between 820 to 840 in the Annals of Ulster. And if you look at the Finn cycle there, you start to see the same characteristics and the same kind of blur and attitude between the Finn cycle and the the actions of the Gael Gael. So yeah,
I do agree, because what you say there, because I think it's in some fragmentary annals as well. The Dark Foreigners or the Danes are seen as like semi-Christian, Norwegians are seen as pagan, and the Gael Gael are seen as apostates, as they are seen as worse than pagans because they're rejecting. And I believe that's one of the terms that are used. But that, again, it's the language they're using, the aggressive language they're using in a very, very these people are anti-Christian, which is where that language is not used by anyone in the early medieval period and the early Christian period in Ireland to describe the pagans, which is why I think they're different. The views are totally different, and they can't be used in syncretism with each other, because I do believe that once Christianity became the more dominant religion, it sought to solidify and protect what it had gained, which we see with the Albigenese rebellion, the Cahors in France, and as the minute a sect of another religion came out, they were very quick to stamp it down. Although Cahors, it took them like 100 years and then 20 years to do it. But what I'm saying is that I think once they became the dominant faith, then we start to see this sort of aggressive protectionism.
Well, how can you get aggressive if your main military force is, heathen or whatnot? Because in the end of the day, the people write this can't go commit violence. What's that?
But with media, with literacy, which is the same way that we can do it today, which we do it today.
Well, the media these days.
Can I
go on
just
there.
put in here? The example of the Cathars, the Albigensian Crusade in Languedoc, is an interesting one, because there are some historians these days who argue that there were no Cathars, that it wasn't an organized religion, that it was invented as such by the Dominicans, by the Inquisition into it. Like, there's a whole pile of sources. There is something going on down there. Christianity has kind of fragmented. There are different beliefs, but it's not an organized thing. It's like I've been to Carcassonne. It's a lovely place. So I know the traditional picture. I think it's a very interesting story. But I listened to a podcast a couple of years ago. Someone saying that there were no Cathars, and I think I'm not going to say who is correct, because French medieval history is not my point.
No, I'm not French either.
It points out the difficulty of history, the importance of sources, the importance of reading different things. And like, one annal can say heathen for some reason, another will say something different, because, like, if we take Brian Boru, the Annals of Ulster were quite pro Brian Boru because he was pouring money into Armagh. Sort of, and I don't know just all the annals. There are biases. We don't know enough about some of them. Like, some of the ones written in Munster would basically ignore what's going on in Ulster, and vice versa. So we have very fragmented sources. And another problem with the sources as regard paganism, the sources are all written in a Christian context. And one where they have Latin words, like the word druid. They take that concept where obviously there was a priesthood in pre-Christian Ireland. Were they druids? Were they connected to Britain? Were they connected to France? I don't think they were connected to Gaul. England, or to the Isle of Anglesey, I'm not very sure. I'm sure there was a priesthood, but we know nothing about them. All the sources we have about them are written much later, and they're all incorporating, when they use the word druid, they're incorporating Roman and Latin concepts, and the same goes for kind of everything.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same. We take our idea of druids from Julius Caesar's work, and he just spent a campaign sort of aggressively going after them in Britain. So it's kind of why is it the history is written by the victors? So
definitely, that's always the case. Just getting back onto topic there. If anybody's wondering what the image I have up there, it is Diarmaid mac Curbal, who is seen as the last pagan High King of Ireland, and this is the point where he his spelling of his name is literally in my head. Up in Clonmacnoise, it is. Which saint is it again? You guys remember, do you? Where Diarmaid mac Curbal converts over. It is
St. Kieran.
St. Kieran, that's the one. So on the left, we have St. Kieran, and on the right, we have Diarmaid mac Curbal. And this is where they are converting over to Christianity in 550. So, as you said there, Owen, it didn't take very long to go from 436 over to 550, where we have this kind of conversion over, where then suddenly the Christians are the majority in, what was it called, in Ireland at the time. for a good chunk of it. But there's still, like, to be quite honest with you, even when we enter into the Golden Age of Ireland, between the kind of period of 550 up to around 793, I can't see, once again, any literature that highlights any massive genocide between the pagans, to be quite honest with you. And of course, if you guys in the comment section disagree with us, definitely have sources. If there is any form of violence committed between Christians onto pagans, definitely put it down in the comment section below. But as I was saying earlier, like, the only literature that I can find, it still kind of is a blurry stage. Like, it isn't suddenly like, hey, look, we're all Roman Christians. Like, even on top of that, Roman Christianity isn't brought into Ireland until around, isn't it? 620s, 650s, where it starts to bleed into Ireland as well. And once again, it's not a suddenly, hey, look, we're all now Roman Christians. And when I say Roman Christians, I mean kind of the ideas of the papacy itself. It's not until around 1153 that, Ireland is, on the same kind of thought wave of Rome at the time. So even at this point of 550, Ireland is kind of doing its own thing. It's kind of got, each monastic settlement kind of has its own interpretation of the Bible and Christianity at this period, because there's a lot of academics turning around these days and saying, perhaps, the St. Bridget's monastic settlement had slightly a different interpretation to the likes of Armagh and Iona, which you can definitely see as you go into the Viking age, where you've got the law of St. Columba, and then you've got the law of St. Patrick and Armagh, where you've got these interpretations in each monastic settlement. So even within the monastic settlements in Ireland itself, it seems that there is different interpretations of what's going on. Never mind with the pagan faiths that are kind of blurring the lines between Christianity and paganism, that we can see in the likes of the Finn cycle and stuff, where we have, alleged Christian warriors who are still, doing various pagan ceremonies and stuff, especially to do with headhunting and that.
Just when you say different interpretations, I think you have to be careful there, because they were all Christian, and it was a Romanist style of Christianity. As the centuries went by, it became more Roman, but they had different interpretations of who was more important. There was a fight between Patrick and Bridget for who's going to become the boss, the patron saint. Not between Patrick and Bridget, but between Kildare, who were the followers of Bridget, and Armagh, the followers of Patrick. Armagh wins out, but in that battle, they produce a lot of literature, which is the basis of the myth of Patrick. We have some literature about Kildare, but if some political things had gone another way, maybe we wouldn't celebrate St. Patrick's Day. The national day would be on the 1st of February, because for a long time St. Bridget was. Many people thought she was more important, and I actually think if you were to go to say the northeast, Donegal, Tyrconnell, they would have said no. Most important is Colmkill, because he was one of them.
Yeah, I mean, there was obviously a massive propaganda campaign by the Armagh Church and obviously others too, and this would bleed into. Obviously, you've got Mercu and Tyrconnell, who are the St. Patrick's hagiographers, and they obviously start a really big campaign to sort of promote St. Patrick as the single entity for the arrival of Christianity. Not only that, you also have later on. So Armagh is actually within the kingdom of Archela originally, and not where the Eneals are based out of. And the Eneals obviously are trying to use St. Patrick to promote their sort of political ambitions. Use the Church of Armagh for their political ambitions. Obviously, they are in opposition to the Archelans as well. So you have this sort of factions within family factions outside of it trying to fight over the church, and the church using this as well to sort of bolster their position, by saying, if you support us, the O'Neills or the Neil at that stage, we'll propagate St. Patrick as the main saint. We will, support your claim to Ulster, etc. So you can see how very quickly, this is 7th, 8th century. So it's already within about 300-400 years. It's just basically the churches are just all out in propaganda mode, sort of trying to establish themselves as and I think just because of how dominant the Neil became is probably one of the main factors for Patrick's rising as the main saint in Ireland.
Yeah, happy days. Just advancing a wee bit further there. Obviously, guys, if there's any comments there that you guys want to, because we're starting to have comments there trickle around. Thanks very much for keeping our algorithm up and going, guys. It's worth a lot to us. And obviously, if there's any questions you have as well, just put it below and I'll actually highlight it for the guys to take apart. But just heading a wee bit, so between 550 to 793, we kind of start to get on more and more Christian ideas and beliefs. And it gets to the point there where we have the likes of the law of St. Patrick, where we start to see more centralizing of the church in Ireland. And as you said there, Owen, you have the likes of St. Columbanus, who goes over to Rome and basically explains to Rome, hey, look, we're Roman Christians. We're all Roman Christians here. We may have a different interpretation, but we're all still the same part of the same family. It's just when modern academics, when they use the term Celtic Christianity or insular Christianity, what they're trying to say is the different interpretations the monastic settlements would have inside of Ireland, but that's their own individual different interpretation. However, they still see themselves, as you were saying earlier, Owen, they still see themselves as part of the Roman Christian family. So by the time we get up to...
Just to interrupt you there, I think the Catholic Church has been very good over millennia as portraying itself as something that is single, that is the same everywhere. But it's not. Like I lived in Brazil for a long time, and I was a little while after going there, I was touring somewhere, and we stumbled upon an open air mass, and the people were praying with their arms held upright, not something you'd see in Dublin or Kerry. And I said, what strange thing is this? It took me a while to realize it was a Catholic church. Their saints are different, and also under the umbrella of the Roman Church, you have, I think, a Syrian church, you have a Bulgarian church, you have lots of, so the Catholic Church is not Unitarian at all. Bad choice of words, is a Unitarian church. And like, even in the early modern period, the kings of Portugal, I think the kings of Spain, the kings of France, they were all granted the right to appoint bishops. So the church in Ireland has always been different from the French, Roman, sort of French, Spanish, Portuguese, and Italian churches. And I think it's no difference. It would have been no different going back 1,500 years.
Yeah, definitely. Just popping over to the comment section there. So the golden age of Ireland ends when the Vikings come in on the scene. Now, it's not a case of Ireland suddenly going into a dark age. In fact, right now, Dr. Claire Downham is arguing that you're dealing with a transition period from the golden age of saints and scholars into an economic golden age. So we're not going to be dealing with a case of, oh, it suddenly dips into a dark age. Oh, no. Ireland does it. That does not happen in Ireland where it goes into a dark age. However, what we do see, as Michal was saying earlier, is a resurgence of paganism in Ireland. So by the time we get up to 793, Armagh is starting to become dominant interpretation of the Christian faith in Ireland at the time. What many modern scholars, and this word is a very modern word, is they refer to it as insular Christianity. However, they still see themselves as part of the Christian world, okay? When modern academics just use the word insular Christianity, they're just talking about Ireland's interpretation of the Roman Christian faith. However, when modern people are saying the end of the Golden Age, they're mostly saying that there's a resurgence of paganism coming back into Ireland again, that we're not seeing the peak of the amount of saints that we're saying previously, like we did between 550, sorry, wouldn't even say 550, around 436 up to around 793, where we had a whole load of saints suddenly appearing, and then there's a huge decline after 793 as we go into this kind of resurgence of paganism inside of Ireland. And as we were saying earlier, you suddenly then have Gall Gael, we have the men of Luckland, and we have various other characters who have very kind of pagan values that are coming into Ireland with them. And you can see that with the archaeology. The archaeology then changes as well, where we can actually find in the 10th century, when doing going through grave goods and stuff, and we find Norsemen coming in, the men of Luckland coming in from Norway, and we're excavating their finds. We're finding pagan goods. One of the best examples, obviously, is being Thor's hammer, which highlights the fact that we're seeing a resurgence on the island. Would you agree with me, lads, or completely disagree?
I tend to agree with you. Yeah, so the Norse, when they came in, brought their own religions. I know in Kerry, they were doing some excavations in North Kerry. I can't remember the name of the place, on a cave. And they found burials in the cave going back over a long period. And there were a certain number of pagan ones there. But once the Norse starts to settle, they start converting relatively quickly, if you consider. Because, when people think about the Norse, they think about Thor, Thor and Odin, etc. But I'm not sure the exact date when they start becoming Christian, but they do very quickly.
No exact date, because it's the same thing again from all the archaeological finds that I went through. It's the very same thing again, where you see a blur once again, and you can see that like there's way more archaeological finds for the Gall Gael, the men of Luckland, and the Danes, in the fact that what you're looking at is actually a massive blur between paganism and Christianity. That Jesus, in a way, is sort of just Jesus and God is kind of just another kind of god and goddess into the collection of their own gods and goddesses at first in the 10th century. So in the 9th century, a lot of the archaeological finds are very kind of Norse pagan, as we would say today. However, into the 10th century, what we're now looking at is this massive blur between the Hiberno-Scandinavians in Dublin, Cork, Limerick, Wexford, and Waterford. In the fact that even in England, when in the 10th century, when the Hiberno-Scandinavians invade York, which they referred to as Jorvik, they erect crosses, and on those crosses, you can actually see both pagan gods and goddesses, and you can see a depiction of Jesus and the crucifixion, which is just like so interesting that we see this blur. And then even in Iceland, if we look at Nile Saga and then compare it to the archaeological finds, we can see Fenrir, a Norse pagan god, on a Christian cross. So it gives us an impression that we see this blur together of paganism and Christianity up until around the 11th century with the reforms of this church, with the Gregorian reforms. We see the popularity because of the interaction between Waterford and Norway. There perhaps maybe Waterford Vikings going over to Norway and actually enforcing Christianity, and actually then suddenly around Gregorian reforms from around I'd say 1030 up to around 1158, that we see suddenly the men of Waterford and the men of Dublin suddenly switching to Christianity and taking fully on the Roman Christian beliefs. And we even have Citric Silkenbeard, who goes on pilgrimage over to Rome, where he comes back with the his own, what was it called? Not his own interpretation, but Rome's interpretation of the reform of the church and stuff. So that around that period of 1030 up to around 1158, you do see suddenly they're becoming Christian. There's no longer a blur before that.
Yeah, I mean,
go ahead.
No, just my point is the question you sort of asked. Obviously, do you see like the assimilation that Philip sort of raised early on? Although I agree, obviously, while early rates targeted monasteries and like behavior, and that Philip sort of touched on behaviors, how behaviors changed. Like Godfred, Viking, I can't remember, Godfred, he used to spare oratories in about 921. So we can, so, it suggests a degree of recognition and even like respect for the Christian institutions. But I think despite assimilation, I still think Irish clerics and writers often like maintained a cultural and like religious boundaries, like portraying the Norse as others for political and rhetorical purposes. So I think, even though there is this sort of assimilation, I do think it goes back to my earlier point about what the annals are saying and other sources, that they are still an other, and it's still an us and them, which we, but that I don't think I'm slightly on the same page, but I do agree with the overarching.
I would disagree with that, because that's, in my opinion, that is full on O'Brien, Ebrien propaganda, because that's written in the period where Murtagh Ebrien was looking to take over Dublin and really put down his force, where you've got all this literature suddenly appearing, like, the likes of the Irish and the foreigners, the war between the Gaul and the Gael and the foreigners. All that sort of literature is written when Murtagh Ebrien is trying to demonize the men of Dublin. Like, as I said there, like the men of Dublin and Waterford, they're going over, and there's a good, because you see suddenly the appearance of St. Olaf's Church. That picture there is St. Olaf's Church in Waterford, and it's one of the early. That particular one was probably built much later on, but based on the earlier St. Olaf's Church in Waterford. But it's interesting that those churches are suddenly appearing in Waterford even before St. Olaf is canonized by the Roman Church, that they're already building churches in dedication to Olaf. It's very interesting, and that you see a sudden change between Odin into Olaf. However, at the same time, as you said there, it doesn't stop the Ebriens propaganding and saying, hey, look, they're still heathens, they're still not part of the Christian way of life. But I do fully believe that's full-on politics from Murtagh Ebrien in the 11th and 12th century. And you see the same thing with the Normans arriving to Ireland with Gerald of Wales, where he demonizes the Christian Irish. Like, we know Christianity came to Ireland originally with St. Patrick in 436. However, Gerald of Wales pretty much makes out that, hey, look, the Irish are pretty much heathens. They've pretty much gone to the ways of complete heresy and stuff to justify the Normans invading Ireland. And that's my interpretation, that, hey, look, Murtagh Ebrien was doing it before Gerald of Wales was, to justify his occupation of Dublin.
Yeah, I agree. It's political. Sorry, just and then you. But I agree, it's political, but obviously politics has a way of bleeding into general populace, like ideals and how they interact with the people. So I think that's just my point, is that although the Vikings are doing one, or the Norse are doing one thing, the Irish at the time are saying another for political reasons, which is why the assimilation isn't so as clean cut as some people would interpret.
I want to give you an actual physical example of an interesting assimilation. I live in Valentia Island. Between Valentia Island and the mainland is Begnish Island. And in the 1950s, they did an excavation there, and they found a settlement. One of the houses especially, some archaeologists say no, but most say yes, it's a Norse house. especially because on the lintel of this house, this stone, had Norse runes on it, but it also had a cross. And I think it's the earliest example in Ireland of a rune stone with a Christian symbol on it. It's a very important find. For some reason, it ended up in the Cork Public Museum. I went there in COVID times, and they let me in, and they brought me to the stone, took off the cover, and left me there, so I was able to touch it. I went back 2 years ago, and the museum was all done up, lovely museum, but it's not on bloody show. It's a really important artifact, but it's not on show. And then just jumping to Geraldus Cambrensis, again, it shows the importance of, when you talk about this stuff, politics. Cambrensis is coming in. He's cousins of the Fitzgeralds, but he is essentially saying the Irish are barbarians and are not properly Christians, which is why the Tudors loved him, especially the Elizabethans. They loved him because he's justifying he's justifying whatever the Normans do, whatever bad they do is justified by this. And so someone was just mentioning Ogham stones, like this stone, this rune stone. Many Ogham stones have been repurposed. They found loads in churches, etc., because people are building churches and they just pick up the Ogham stones and put them, because you can't read Ogham if it's a lintel stone above a window in a church. You can't read it properly because you're supposed to read Ogham along the corners. So they just turned out to be great stones that are in many buildings in Ireland.
Yeah, I just touch on the Gerald Cambrensis sort of statement as well, that John de Courcy comes across the Ulster, and obviously, like I said earlier, the Aonaill are going out to Armagh and sort of saying, right, you justify our right to rule, and we'll justify St. Patrick's sort of claim to being the Primarch saint, and they use there's a story linking the Aonaill to Tara that comes through Armagh's sort of fabrication of history and linking it to St. Patrick. And John de Courcy comes across and recognizes that this story is very important to, he recognizes it as basically part of the propaganda, but he reinforces it, this Aonaill link to Tara, because he's able to use that for his own means too. So it's funny how we have the Christianity comes across, then families start using it for their own political gains, and then even the next wave that follow in after them are still using the old stories to justify what they're doing too. And it's just on and on continuation of assimilation and repurposing of, whether it's repurposing myths, stones, or sacred sites.
This sort of thing happens again in the 1600s. So in the 1620s, you have a lot of Irish, especially clerics, Catholic clerics, have fled Ireland. They're in Louvain, in the first Catholic college. They coined the Irish name for Irish, because until 1620, 1630, the Irish name for the Irish, they talked about Gaelic and they talked about Gaul. There wasn't a word for Irish. There was a word for Gael and foreigner. But then they realized, hold on, we need a word. Because we're like, both sides have been crushed. So they came up with the word aeronaut. It dates from then. But you have a fight between these Catholic clerics and some Scottish ones. And these ones are fighting over the history of Christianity. Some Scottish guys and some Protestants were trying to Protestantize Irish Christianity. Some Scots Catholics were, to me, stealing Irish history to say, basically, the land of saints and scholars was Scottish. And and then the same sort of thing happens. The Franciscans and the Jesuits hated each other at that stage. They're always fighting with each other. So when you're talking about religion, it's always complex. That's why, like what we started talking about, this so-called genocide, that's why things like that drive me crazy, because they're based on very simple pictures of a very, very complicated world. And I think going back to when Ireland was changing from pre-Christian to Christian, and I also think the Norse, there were a lot of people who were both at the same time. You know, there were people who maybe they were their Lord told them to baptize, so they did, and they would go to mass, but they still believed in Tor, or you know, someone who a Gaelic warrior 300 years ago, he may have been baptized because his Lord told him to, but he may still have held his old beliefs. You would have had a lot of this at certain periods.
Yeah, I think obviously then you start going into the point of view or the thinking of where does sort of your cultural beliefs and your local sort of so there's like a tradition to give penance to a local deity, and it's almost like a yearly festival that you sort of go through, and that's, you know, but at the same time you're a Christian, but you're doing these, if the Roman Catholic Church saw these little quirks that you do in your village towards this totem, or, you know, and they're just seen as cultural quirks, as it were, or not really seen as, they've lost their religious importance, but they're more of a local thing that's been passed down. You know, it's like, where does that blending end and start? Because we can all do it, especially in Ireland. We can specifically point out things that are seen, are probably not Christian, but have been passed down through local traditions. Whether that's coins and wells, or I know there's a Dwayne Fitzsimmons has a great TikTok on a local quirk in down his way, and he believes it's sort of passed on through you know, through paganism, and it's just been adopted. It's certainly not a Christian practice, but it's something that the locals do all the time at this local holy well.
Just in relation to that, this book by Ronald Hutton, okay, turning backwards, Pagan Britain, is extremely good. He's a very interesting historian, because originally he's a historian of the civil wars in Britain in the 1640s, but he comes from a Wicca background, and he's done a lot of history, and he actually shows how many beliefs that many people think are pagan are not, such as the Green Man in England, such as Sheila na Gig, and many other things. In the Renaissance, in the medieval times, Italian writers are always talking about goddesses and stuff. Some they take from Roman literature, others they invent. So there's a lot of behavior that we think must be pagan because it doesn't fit in with the orthodox behavior, but it's more folk behavior than pagan. And like Hutton says, for example, the Cailleach, you know, the hag, the goddess, he says that in Scotland there's evidence for her being pre-Christian, but not in Ireland. I know a lot of people would disagree with him, and it's not my area, and it's not a fight I want to get into, but it just, you can interpret
comment section on fire.
And people were asking about human sacrifice. Hutton writes very well about several of the bodies, either in Ireland and in the British Museum. And he takes apart bit by bit some interpretations that says this poor unfortunate was a human sacrifice. I was a pre-Roman. It shows, hold on, no, this was Roman, post-Roman, and it wasn't necessary. It looks like he was killed in a battle. So even with a dead body, because if you go to the museum in Dublin, National Museum, they have an exhibit there. I think it's called Kingship and Sacrifice, where they have several bodies. And it pushes this interpretation that these were sacrificed and it's got to do with kingship. I'm agnostic here, but I look at that exhibit in a very different way after reading Hutton.
Yeah, that's very, very interesting. All right, and it kind of fits in with the next question on sources and stuff. If you're looking for Owen's sources, I actually just put it onto the next slide here. Actually, I'll make it slightly bigger so we can see Owen's references and sources that he handed over to me just before we went live and stuff. What was it called? And if you're looking for my sources, well, actually, I'll get a picture of it there. The book that I was referencing earlier is The Early Fin Cycle by Kevin Murray, down in UCC and stuff. So you can get it on the Four Courts website if you're interested in that one. But I just noticed in that book, it's exactly like how we see paganism when the Vikings come in, that it's not a case of just clean cut, that when you're dealing with the Finn cycle, it is a blur between kind of pagan beliefs with the Christian beliefs as well. And that's why I kind of use it a lot as kind of standing point to say, hey, look, no, actually, it's not 100% clean cut. Everyone's now Christian, including the warriors and stuff. It is a case of them, having these kind of heathen actions, very, very similar to the Gaul Gael, and that in reality, maybe it was a case of, when the Viking Age did come in, that it was a blur between the Gaul Gael and the current at the time in the mythology referred to as the Fenians, that it's not clean cut whatsoever. Is there any other references or anything, Michal and Owen, that you guys want to reference as we continue on? And I'll highlight Owen's list there for you guys.
Actually, there's a very good one on Tara. It's a free book. If you look at, I did 2 videos recently on Tara. If you look up the notes to those, I give a lot of references. There was a book about kingship and Tara that it's a collection of works. One of the guys goes into major depth in linguistics, and he has a great knowledge of India, like pretty early India, and comparing Indo-Europeans' beliefs, etc. Because Tara is a very, very interesting place because it goes back to the Neolithic era. Then it was used in Bronze Age. Then it was used in the Iron Age, and it was always interlinked with the idea of kingship, and it looked very much, and even the name Chower in Irish, it comes from a word to do with sacred enclosure in Indo-European. It is something that dates way back before Christianity, and it stayed as something important to do with kingship. There's some very interesting stuff written there, and there's a lot of good sources in that.
Yeah. And also on top of that, well, just to have that continued interaction between the comment section and ourselves. This is another comment that really highlights to me when talking about the fairy forts and stuff, that there is a blur between our old quote unquote Celtic pagan beliefs and our modern Christian interpretation, that it's not a case of just clean cut, hey, look, suddenly all the Irish are suddenly all perfect Christians. In fact, even up to the 20th century, a lot of these kind of Celtic pagan beliefs of the likes of the Danann and stuff kind of blurred into our folklore, that it's not a case of, hey, look, we're suddenly all kind of Christians. We still, even today, have our folklore beliefs. I still have my folklore beliefs. I'm still way into the likes of the fairy folk and stuff, and I still, out of my own respect of my own culture, wouldn't go in and destroy a fairy fort and stuff.
Just there, the idea, the folklore, much of the folklore about fairy forts is relatively modern. Because until the downfall of Gaelic Ireland, I don't like using the word fairy because it means a tiny person originally.
Yeah.
The Tuatha Dé Danann, etc. To me, that's where Tolkien got his idea of elves.
Yeah.
That's a completely different argument, but that's the sort of, they were big people. The Victorians had this fascination with like tiny elves and fairies, etc. I don't like the word impose, but in the Victorian times, Irish people start talking about fairy folk. You know, the ring forts go to this fairy thing. Beforehand, they wouldn't have said fairy. They knew what they were. The English didn't, because in 1600, Mountjoy builds a fort on a ring fort in somewhere in Armagh, and one of his officers says, "Oh, this was built by the Danes." It wasn't. It was a ring fort. So the fairy fort thing is 200 years old, maybe a little bit more. It's a new type of folklore that it's bastardized Gaelic beliefs and throw in Victorian ideas, etc., etc.
So is that just so I understand? Is that linguistics you're arguing, whether the term fairy? So
No,
if we
no,
use
it's
the
the
whole thing is
Victorian.
imported.
Yeah, so I think Victorian people came along and they began to write down the rise of antiquarianism, and they were trying to understand these stories, these legends, and they reduce the Gaelic beliefs to fairies. And then instead of talking about a ring fort, probably the Irish people, they had some other world beings were involved, but these other words become fairy fort. It becomes a fairy fort. It's because it filters through middle class, educated middle class, and then it filters back, and then soon, within 100 years or so, everyone's talking about fairy forts.
That's fascinating because fairy folk is very much a kind of more of an Anglo word rather than Irish word. Like I can't even see how Irish would have any form of it. It's very like to me. Now I'm not linguistic whatsoever, but fairy folk, even the word fairy seems very kind of Anglo. It doesn't seem to.
I watched a YouTube podcast. I can't remember what it's called. They do a lot of stuff. It goes on for about 2 or 3 hours about the history of fairies in Ireland, Scotland, England, and Wales. It's really interesting.
You see Michael doing the researching now on the point.
No, I'm writing notes so I can research later.
Right, yeah. My plan is to actually rewatch this.
Andrea is asking, what did the Gaelic call fae? We don't really know as such. To me, the Tuatha De Danann were the Gaelic equivalent, but they were very different. As I said, they were similar to Tolkien's elves. They were beings. If you look at the Battle of Ventry, I forget what it's called in Irish. One guy, they need support to fight the king of the world, and he goes to his father. I think his stepfather or his father-in-law is from the Tuatha De Danann, and he wanders into his house. And this guy argues with some other Tuatha De Danann, and they decide to support them. So the Tuatha De Danann go down to Ventry, fight the invaders for a day, delay them, and then they go back home. So they're like just neighbors, slightly different neighbors. It's a funny interpretation. And in the Fianna cycle, like Dermot from Dermot agus Grania, he was deeply connected with the Tuatha De Danann, and I think his stepfather was one. And he had although he's from South Kerry, at least that's what they claim here, he had some connection with Bruna Boyne. And the Tuatha De Danann guys appear in Teoriach Dermot agus Grania and in several other Fianna stories, I'm fairly sure.
What about, I know you said not a linguist, but what about the word she?
She, Sidhe.
Yeah.
She starts off as a different word for ring fort. A mound. The she mounds. So it was probably referring to ring barrows and stuff like that come from the Bronze Age. They're called she, and then the word migrates. So sorry, Andrea. That's the best word for fae. She, Sidhe, and I think there's a fada on the A. The word migrates to the people. It's in a way it's a later word for Tuatha De Danann.
Interesting.
It is interesting. Like
mythology is totally outside of my area of study. So to hear people who can at least interpret, given me their interpretation is brilliant. But like I say, I always thought it was she, and I would have thought I knew that, or I presumed there was a connection between the two of the Danan and fairy folk, and I don't know whether I'd heard that or whether it just seemed like a natural correlation. But I was not aware that our fairy folk mythology was so heavily imported, in the Victorian era.
It's not that the mythology was imported,
or interpretation of it, more is maybe what I mean.
Reinterpreted.
Yeah, more Anglophone, because like that word fairy, it's so Anglo compared to earlier words like to the Danan and stuff like that. Like if there was a play on word of to the Danan into what we now call fairy, if the word was similar to what we now use fairy, I would say, oh yeah, you can see the link there. But fairy is so Anglo, it's so English, my interpretation. Just want to quickly fly over. By the way, guys, good evening to everybody who's just jumped on there, or if you're like myself over in Australia or Japan or the Philippines, good morning. If you guys are just jumping on to now, if you have any questions whatsoever from the conversion of paganism to Christianity, definitely slap them below. That's the topic we are covering today with Dr. Owen O'Neill and also Michal from Clans and Dynasties. And also on top of that as well, lads, definitely head over to not just my channel at Irish Medieval History to subscribe, but head over to Michal and Owen O'Neill's channels as well. The description of their channels are just below their names. And also make sure they keep the questions and comments going in there. I've gone through my main presentation now, guys, so it's up to you guys to start filling in with your questions and stuff now that you have us here for this argument that you wanted to argue with us for so long. And tell me this one as well, lads. If you still believe in this great genocide of the pagans, please put your references down below. We'd love to see it.
Sorry, can I just give? I found that YouTube that I mentioned. It's 3.5 hours long.
Wow.
The channel is called a Histocrat, Histocrat, CRAT, and it's called The Fairies, a history, mythological, MYTHILLOGICAL podcast. So there you can dive very deeply into the idea, the mythology and etymology and history of fairy belief in Ireland and Britain.
Do you guys have the link there? And I can actually put it into the comments. If you send me the link there.
I'll type it into the chat.
Yeah, type it into the chat there. And I'll actually highlight it for everyone to see.
Can I type it into the public chat?
Yeah, type it into the public chat away. As long as it's on this public chat on the, what was it called? The restream, it should be able to go to everyone, and then I can highlight it. Do you know how to do that, Owen? If you look, are you on computer?
Yeah.
Okay, on the right side, let me X out of it, and that way I can click it again. So on the right side, you should see chat at the very there should be buttons like design, capitals, codes, music, notes, and then just under it, you see chat.
No. I'll put it in the private chat and you can paste it in.
Yeah, I'll see what I can do there.
Oh, they've also got a video on Ireland and Druids. I'll have to have a look at that.
I definitely have to have an old poke anyway.
It's a good one.
The Fairy Queen. That's a horrific one. You see, that would be out of my field of expertise, but it is interesting because I hardly ever look at it is important still, is the 19th and 20th century, well, the 18th, 19th and 20th century interpretation of the medieval era. And it's definitely something I still, I should really look into here and there. It's just, I'm sorry to say, guys, but after 1603, my interest in history just overall just kind of starts to dimmer down.
The Fairy Queen is written in the 1590s. The Fairy Queen is Queen Elizabeth. And it's not in that book that Spencer describes that. He describes he's talking there about the putting down of the Desmond Rebellion, and that's it's in an unpublished book called The Present State of Ireland, where he basically calls for the genocide of Ireland, real genocide.
Oh yeah.
If I start talking about my feelings about Spencer, we'll be demonetized.
It's okay. He had some specific feelings about our kind too. So
Yeah. And the Fairy Queen is a very interesting book, beautiful poetry, hard to read, and bloody awful if you study what it means.
Ugh.
And so just to reply, Andrea is asking about thoughts on authors like Morgan Daimler. I know her stuff, she's very good. The other ones I don't really know, but Morgan Daimler's stuff is good. I wouldn't agree with everything she writes, but she writes it well. She knows her sources, she knows the material. That's going way off our topic.
Kaylee Fallett, can you bring up Kaylee Fallett's comment?
Let me look for it there. I think you can play. Can you click show as well? No.
No.
I'm actually quickly. What did she say on that one? I actually can't find her, to be honest with you.
She says, "I've heard you talk that way. We look at gods in Ireland is from a very Roman perspective. Can you elaborate on that in this stream a little bit?"
Oh, found it. Yep, there we go.
Got it up?
Yeah, I got it there. Can you see it now?
Yeah, I can see it.
It is. Yeah, I can definitely elaborate on that one. Mihal, you'd love to elaborate on that one even more, though, because you love Roman history, don't you? Or do you want me to elaborate on that one?
No. I mean, Roman history is my love, but my early love. It was my first girlfriend of history. Before I married Irish history. Yeah,
that girlfriend he still thinks about.
Yeah, that's it. That's it. Every time I see a Roman legionnaire on history, I should call her.
One point that's important is the Greeks had this idea of a pantheon of gods, reducing, oversimplifying. The Romans did the same thing. So therefore, not everybody, many people think that Gaelic Irish / Celtic had the same thing. Whereas people forget, like, the main Roman gods, Jupiter, Mercury, etc. But you had not a billion, you had hundreds of other gods as well. Like local gods of corners of houses, gods of families. So it's this idea of a pantheon, of a limited number of fixed gods, of this god or goddess always being the god of something. And just being that, like the god of war, the king of the gods, the other ones. Whereas the Romans were very flexible, and especially as they conquered other countries, more and more gods came in. If anyone is actually in London, I really recommend going to this. It's in the city of London, the real financial heart. There's a building owned by Bloomberg. He used to be mayor of New York. He's a big financier. And when they're building the building, they discovered a temple of how do you pronounce it? Mithras. So you can go in for free, and you go down to this temple and you look at it. It's in the dark, and then lights come on. It's a brilliant experience. It's the nearest I've been to some sort of authentic pagan ceremony. That's getting off. Sorry, that question a bit.
No, I will just add. Also, when we talk about the look at gods in Ireland from a very Roman perspective, is that it's Roman authors that are writing about early druids and the gods, and they're using their own perspective and their own religion as almost a template for their interpretations. They're not really learning about these religions per se. They're sort of looking at it and going, "Oh, you've got a sun god, well, or god of war, that's Mars." They're not really going into the in depths about. actually, do you know what? When you like look at our saints, the Roman Catholic saints. No saint is a saint of one thing. Saint Joseph is a saint of traveling, or Saint Declan is the saint of mothers who have lost babies. But they actually have multiple. They encompass like Saint Joseph's like travelers, policemen, soldiers, whatever. They encompass a lot of things. And when I use that example in the sense of these Roman historians or calligraphers or writers are not learning the in-depths of these individuals. They just use their own template and their own narrative and their own prejudice when they're writing about these individuals. So when we say we are talking about a Roman perspective, we're saying to look at the information basically through a Roman's eyes, not as a Celt or whatever Druid you want to say, whatever language you want to use when you look back at it, because it's written with a certain bias, a Roman bias.
Nice. And popping over, make sure to keep the comments flying in there as well, guys. It's good for my algorithm, that's why. But anyway, since we're on Folklore, how American is the US version of Halloween? Everyone I talk to here has a different opinion, ranging from bastardized pagan holiday to mostly American invention. Ooh, that's a nasty one. Yeah, I think this is a very good comment, especially going into Halloween, and especially into the topic that we're covering right now, because I do believe that the person leaving the comment has an agenda that they're trying to highlight deep down that's fitting to the subject as a whole, which I do actually agree with. And I think it's another piece of evidence to support my original argument that it's not a case of cut and dry, hey, look, in 550, everybody is a Christian, that we do have for a very long time the ideas of Samhain that constantly blur between paganism first and foremost, and then Christians trying to work it into Christianization, especially when there's so many little ceremonies and stuff that to the people in Ireland at the time sort of work. And when they stop doing them, various plagues kick off and various stuff like that. For example, putting cows later on as we go into the events that happen around the period of St. Bridget's and stuff. There's an entire ceremony where you have two fires and you put the cows through them. And at the time, people are very much like a case of, hey, look, why is this ceremony working? And when they stop doing the ceremony, a plague starts to kick off. Now, scientifically, it is proven that if you put a cow next to fire and stuff, it's got a thing of singeing the skin of the cow, which actually kills off a lot of bacteria, which could explain why, when they stopped doing this tradition, plague started to kick off, or illness started to kick off in a lot of these regions and stuff, and why Christians were like, okay, how can we work this ceremony into our practices and stuff? And that could be why we have this transition period from Halloween, holidays like, for instance, Halloween, into its original kind of Samhain kind of interpretation, then it converting into Halloween that we have today.
Well, I agree, but disagree a bit in that, again, a lot of practices that a Puritan, a strict Catholic could say are pagan. They're not pagan, they're folklore. For example, where are half of my daughter's schoolmates weren't there today? They went up to the ploughing festival. The ploughing championships. The ploughing championships is something you could almost call religious in Ireland at the moment. Everybody from a rural background heads there. And because there's whenever there's an election, it's full of politicians too. But like trying to explain that in 1,000 years is going to be difficult. So you have a lot of folkloric things that, looking back, many people love to call them pagan when they're not. And the Halloween occurs, the 1st and the 2nd of November are Catholic festivals, All Souls and All Saints. It's also because people say it's a harvest festival. The harvest is well over in Ireland. 31st of October is a bloody dark time. It's a cold time. It's a miserable time. I think it's a festival that was put on for basically to cheer people up, because you're heading into the depths of winter. It was probably pre-pagan. Something was celebrated at that stage. But again, over time, it's changed a bit. Like nowadays, in a month's time, all over Facebook, you're going to see people talking about, oh, the Celts and the thinning of the veil between the two worlds. The idea of the thinning of the veil, again, is Victorian. It's either Victorian or Edwardian. It's not. You don't find a single reference to that, but you will find a million references on Facebook, a million Facebook historians in a couple of months.
I mean, I always associated it with obviously transition into winter and associated with the with fires and the dead, not so much. And I thought that was where the blurring of the thinning of the veil sort of came into it.
We don't know, because Catholics have been celebrating the All Souls Day. All Souls is the first and All Saints on the second, or vice versa. Shows you I was really paying attention for all 18 years of Catholic school. So that goes back a long time. What it was a winter festival or something. It goes back, I'm sure, before Christian era in Ireland. But was it a religious festival? What did it mean then? The date for the festival continued. The reason, more or less, but the religious things put on probably changed. We don't know what the festival was beforehand. But many of the things that people say are pagan are not. It's just people enjoying themselves on a cold and wet night.
And then one day a priest came along and started a sermon beforehand, like every battle, and then suddenly it became a church thing, and talking about
it could though mark the end of the cattle raiding season, perhaps when the Fenian came in, depending on what the Fenian, because it could be the last few battles and stuff, because there is battles and skirmishes happening in the literature in September. So what Halloween could actually be is the coming in of the Fenian, which could explain why people were putting it on masks and stuff, because I noticed there is a spiritual. Sorry.
At the same time, in the 1590s, the Gaelic Irish loved to raid in winter, because if you're raiding someone on the 21st of July, you're going to get seen, because it's going to be daylight until 11 o'clock, and then the sun starts coming up at 3:30. Whereas in winter, if it's a cloudy day, it's dark all day. It's like if the sun rises 8:30, 9, and the sun starts going down, say 3 o'clock. So
because
if you want to get somewhere without being seen and surprise somebody, and they will have all their and if you want to be very mean, these people will have all the food, the crops, harvested, the food stored, so you can catch a lot more.
Well, the reason why there was massive amount of cattle raiding happening between November to Halloween is the fact that it's pasture time. It's when the cattle go outside of the protection of the forts, the ring forts and stuff. So because of that, cattle raiders would be able to give them more opportunity to both defend the cattle that they're paid to defend, or to go out there and steal the cattle from rivals and stuff. So I think that could be why there's a massive jump of cattle raiders and stuff, because I know there's other cycles and stuff where Fenian then go under for the winter and stuff, go camp, inside of the ring forts and stuff, and they have permission by various kings and stuff to do that. But I don't think it would stop them from raiding. Yeah, it's a good point.
Because traditionally in Europe, winter is a non-campaigning season, because if you go a winter campaign, you're going to die. A large amount, as happened in Kinsale. The English lost at least 6,000 men in Kinsale. O'Neill O'Donnell lost a lot on the way down and the way back. But a cattle raid, how many, your best soldiers or most of your soldiers are nice and warm around a fire in a ring fort, you send out a small bunch as well. And another thing is about bullying. In the summer, many of the cattle and the other animals are out either in uplands or they're out elsewhere. In wintertime, they'd be on closer lands. So that if you want them eating the grass, the fodder in harder to reach areas in summer, in winter where it's wet and sometimes there's no grass, you want them as near to home as possible.
Ah, right. That makes sense, actually. Why they're actually changing the pasturing.
And
Yeah, that does make sense.
could be something like that. There could be a relation to Halloween going way back. It's hard to know.
But we also, I mean, we see it's not just Irish and Christian holidays. I'm pretty sure if you go, like you said, folklore, any folklore of any country, I think there's going to be a commonality for a lot of transition through seasons, certain times of the year that have a general overlap, and especially how many Catholic sort of feast days, saint feast days there are and stuff like that. I'm sure you could easily just pinpoint a saint's feast day and go, oh, look at that, it just coincides with some local folklore or tradition. So whether they are incorporated for that specific reason, there's so many of them. I'm sure some of them were, and again on the same day, on the same thing. I'm sure some of them were just a coincidence. A happy one at that for the Catholic Church.
Some very lucky person has said they don't remember rain on Halloween. They're lucky.
Well, I actually live in a place at the minute where you don't get snow. So I've never had a white Christmas where I live right now. So
I live in Valencia Island. Yeah. We get snow once a year for about 10 minutes, and I think I'm struggling to call it snow.
A snowflake. Yeah. That's a good question. Where's pilgrimage common in medieval Ireland? I'd like to have a pop at this one.
Very.
Yeah, go on.
Very.
Yeah, it was very common, but not only was it very common, it was very lucrative. So a lot of families would own either the monastic site itself or the area that was of great import, or would have tariffs that you paid along the way. So you would go along the way. There's I think it's the O'Hallorans from County Clare were made very wealthy they were a border family, so they were based on the borders of County Clare against Galway. So they made a good bit of wealth in there. They were not a good bit of wealth. They needed a force to fight against, make sure any encroachments from any Galway families, probably the O'Maddens or whatever, would come across. Well, actually, the O'Shaughnessy's, they're around that area. So anyway, they needed to be forced. So what they did was they had toll booths basically along this route. They lived just right alongside a pathway that led to a pilgrimage site, and they would toll pilgrims and they made a huge amount of money, enough to make sure that they could defend their borders against O'Shaughnessy raids. So it was, not only was it very popular, it was so popular that families were making a killing off it, literally. So it's it's great to see that. I just wanted to put that wee tidbit of information out about the O'Hallorans.
I have another point. It kind of joins together this idea of it's something that has lasted for thousands of years in Ireland related to religion. Think of Newgrange, Brunabonia. When they restored it, I know there's controversy about this. They put that big white cover of white quartz.
Yeah.
Now, I've read lots about it. So I'm not talking about whether it's good or bad, but there was white quartz there originally. So that's 5,000 years ago. Jump ahead of another 1,500 years. Many wedge tombs had, like we know the idea of the wedge tomb, the big cover under the stones. Some of them were actually covered with gravel, and there was white quartz around them. White quartz was associated with them. Jump to early medieval times. Like near where I live, there's zillions of monastic sites. You can fall over them, but you find white quartz at a lot of them, and it seems to have been associated with pilgrimages. There are lakhs, which was a sort of stone where when you came on a pilgrimage at this place, you'd walk around it, say a few prayers, but you'd leave a white quartz stone. Jump to the modern period, go to a graveyard in Dublin, and you'll see lots of graves covered in a white quartz stone. So I've been thinking about this question on tours that I give quite a lot, but I've never seen anyone study it. But it's just white quartz has been associated with death, with burial in Ireland since at least Neolithic times, and it still is. So I don't know exactly how to describe that, but it's a continuation of some form of practice. And Ray is saying that you'll be more likely to see ghosts too. Stay away from graveyards.
Yeah, well, that's it. Maybe that's what you take it. Like a ghost following you. You go on your pilgrimage and you throw the quartz sign and say, "Right, you can stay here. I'm off home."
Yeah.
There was another question I think I saw earlier. Hang on. About
we'll just spoken pride. Go on.
I can't remember where it is. It was something to do with the Irish Olympics.
And just
the tall teen, I think it was, but I can't see it here. Speaking to the microphone. Who's to speak?
Yeah. If there's any problems or anything, guys, could you just name which one has the technical problems with the sounding and stuff? I'm perfectly aware the sounding isn't perfect yet, but this is why Patreon and stuff exists. Hint, 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 hint. We can get better equipment and stuff because that's where the money goes. And also different advice for different forms of microphone and all that stuff. And even on top of that, even when we get the microphone, remember, we're not professionals in any of this stuff. We are specializing in Irish medieval history. We don't specialize in sound, so we're kind of just making this up as we go along. We just kind of get the microphone and just kind of shove it into the laptop and stuff. Well, that's what I do anyway.
I've got three I've literally 3 microphones.
I stole my microphone off my son.
I just robbed it earlier and just shoved it in.
Look at that professional one that isn't being used properly.
Stop. I have a blue Yeti over there and I don't even know how it works. I shove it in this way and that way. We're doing all kinds of mad stuff.
The question about the games is from Dan Breen, 1916. Dan Breen, 1916. And it was asked at 23:56, 35.
Yeah, he's still alive. He says, all right, Taltine. Oh, yeah, I've got it. Whether real or myth, I can imagine warfare was endemic. I couldn't imagine people gathering for Olympic-style games or such. Actually, I don't know about Taltine specifically, but we did have in fairs or fetes or whatever you want to call it, Airnucks, I think they're called. Airnuct or something like that. You see, if it's an original, actually the original spelling, if you ever go look at the O'Connor Kerrys, their homeland is the original spelling of their area, Iraq or something like that, is a corruption of this. But basically, it's gatherings of people from all over, and you would have gatherings to dispute, to sort out ruling disputes, like who's going to be the next, Tarnister, or who's going to be the next, put their claims forward. Marriage. Families to get together would bring eligible children to be married and to sort out local disputes and to celebrate. This is well documented in medieval history, and it goes back even further. And we're not the only people to do it either. This idea that warfare was endemic, when you that's another problem when I think the wording's wrong for Ireland and warfare, in the sense of we had a lot of fighting, but we didn't really have a lot of warfare. the battles that we write about are so, like, look, Battle of Clontarf, it was so mind-blowing that this massive battle, and I think there needs to be a sort of almost distinction between a couple of your young warriors going out and raiding another clan settlement and a pitched battle. And I think that pitched battles were not as endemic as anywhere else. We weren't a violent people. I don't, but then again, I don't consider mostly cattle raiding as violent. It could be violent, but it was mostly I don't know another word, but like cultural, or it was mostly politics. It was mostly a bit of everything. We'll go down, we'll steal a bit of castle, prove our point. We'll go down, steal a bit of cattle because for the crack. There's a lot of reasons for cattle raiding besides violence. So
I think that just before we talk about home, I think sport is something natural. Get together 5 or 6 kids, throw in a tin can, and they're going to invent a form of sport with it. So, like, you go back, it's got 2,000 years ago, it's going to be no different. And then you have fairs. People come together in fairs to sell cows, to sell clothing, to buy stuff, and they're going to drink and have fun. But there's going to be sport. Like, the fathers may be sitting down drinking whiskey, but they may have brought all their young sons, and they don't want to be disturbed drinking their whiskey or their beer or their mead. So they will throw take the hurling stick, go down.
Yeah, exactly.
So there's going to be sports, and the games themselves there's exaggerations about them, but there probably were sort of games which, even at a small level, between one town and the other, between Valencia and Portmagee, nowadays they all have football clubs or hurling clubs. And then probably naturally there were sometimes more larger games, sort of, say, regional ones. And of course they invented or they upped these to make something national because they're copying the idea of the Olympic Games.
Yeah, I think there's also a thing about, and we see it a lot. It still exists, is what I mean, in parts of Africa where you have warfare, but it's not warfare. It's why am I getting the word here? Where it's mock warfare, but it's ritualistic. Ritualized. Thank you. That was the word. Ritualistic warfare. So
that's called rugby.
Yeah. But you would have that, in medieval Ireland, I'm near sure of it, where you would have gatherings. These gatherings of families from all over would come to a specific point every year to celebrate, but you would have ritualistic fighting as well. At the end of the day, you don't want to lose your best fighters at a friendly. You don't play your best. You don't play your best men at a friendly match. You save them for the World Cup. So again, you want your best man. You want your man to win. So you do put your best man out, but you're not going to send him out to where he's going to be seriously hurt or injured or killed. It's about pride at the end of the day, and that's basically the height of it. So these. But I'm sure to anyone outside looking in would see these as still quite violent or barbaric. So again, I
think anyone who's never heard of hurling and they come to Ireland and they watch a hurling game, or it looks quite violent. Well, last night my daughter, as I said at the beginning, she was playing in an under-16s county final, and to someone who just knows how to play soccer and they see a good, healthy game of Gaelic football being played, it looks violent.
I only played it. I played it as a child, but a very young child.
I love hurling. Hurling is great. Get out there and just smash the boys. I hated soccer because it was too soft for me. I love just getting in there with the shoulder and smashing the boys. You have good crack, like you bounced around the place for a bit and then come in again.
Killer now.
Yeah, well, I was always I'm 5'7". Yeah, I was always the goalkeeper, and
Yeah.
but then I ended up when I was 10. I ended up going to England for an English private school. Oh.
Oh, the
And
joys.
they didn't do hurley there. We did hockey.
I'll just pump over to this question there on the old Uggams before getting back over to, because there's another comment over that then. Where's the, okay, right, I finished this one and I'll rant on about the next one. Were Uggams used as just a writing system, or was there another purpose to the language? I see a lot of conflicting information on this, but I saw a lot of it in Kildare.
There's one just over the wall after my back garden. There's actually two Ogham stones near me. Ogham is a form of writing. It's not runes in that the strokes are based on individual letters. It's based on, and if you read the work of people like David Sifter and other experts, it's actually based on the Roman alphabet. It emerged alongside Christianity, and later in the medieval period, people actually they've written some books in Ogham, which must have taken ages. Most of the Ogham stones basically says somebody, son of somebody of such and such a tribe. It's a name. They were kind of used just for marking posts and stuff like that. And I think they tried it at first, and then after 100 years, maybe 200 years, they just went back to writing with the Roman numerals as it was easier. But it's actually exported. I think it probably started in Munster because Cork and Kerry is where the biggest amount is. And if you're actually in Cork, go to UCC. There's this building there. My daughter calls it the Harry Potter building. I think it's called the Aula Maxima. There's a corridor there with about 30 Ogham stones, and they're really well preserved because, like the ones near me, there's cattle in the fields. The cattle rub themselves, so over hundreds of years they wipe out the letters. So an Ogham in the wild is very hard to read. You have to see it in a museum or something.
I just want to say, Seamus O'Blian, the reason the accent is foreign, I'm born and bred here, okay? Just because I went across to England to be educated.
He's one of them Gaul Gaels, them foreign Irish people, huh? Okay, back on topic again. Once again, okay, right. If we're making statements that that Patrick came in, colonizing the Irish and stuff, we need evidence to support it, guys. Like, okay, go and find this evidence. I don't care at this point, because so far I've been looking at the comments and I wanted somebody to have legitimate argument here because it's good for my algorithm. However, all I've gotten from people is aggressive comments. No actual source, any kind of sources, even a website to elaborate on that I could look at and say, okay, so this is what's going on, A, B, and C. Instead of just gotten like a few negative comments here and there, nothing that's been elaborated on. So if you guys believe St. Patrick came and colonized the Irish, you need references to support that. I've got references to support he didn't. So there we go. Okay, is there any other comments or anything you guys want to elaborate on? Because we've got a good few juicy ones in here.
Someone just, Andrea asked, was Ogham from the Romans? It was an Irish language, an Irish alphabet, the first alphabet in Irish, but it was copied. It was based on the Roman alphabet, ABC, etc. I don't think it was necessary to secretly write because it's bloody hard to write. Even if you're carving it on, try and write your name in Ogham, and then by the time you've finished, you will prefer the Roman letters. And yeah, there are quite a few Ogham stones in Britain, and they found objects with Ogham on it, but it's much more difficult than the ordinary letters.
Just getting back into the comment section. Any comments or any questions and stuff I did miss? I apologize for that. There's just like coming down, so we're like slowly trying to actually answer them correctly and stuff instead of being somewhat ignorant and kind of putting it to the side. So any questions we miss, I do apologize for that. Just post it up again and I'll actually go back over it. if I haven't already gone through the list already. On top of that as well, guys.
There was someone asking. Sorry, there was someone asking a lot about
Yeah,
Fitzgerald and
was
stuff like that. But I think we can come
yeah.
back another time.
I was about to elaborate on that. You literally have your man here. Look, I'll highlight him for you. His name is Mihal. He comes from clans and dynasties, and he has a full website, YouTube. You literally just YouTube him, TikTok. Well, what other social medias do you have, Mihal?
Well, we'll just talk about Facebook, everything. But I will just say, you also have another individual, another one who literally Fitzgerald's and the Fitzgeralds of Desmond, should we say, would probably be his main forte, and their sub branches of Kerry, the Fitzmaurices and stuff. So also check out Owen. But yes. He'd be able to impart some wisdom too, some local knowledge. But I can certainly give you a lot of their history too. Yeah, if you've got family questions, pop across to my channel. I'll happily get you the information you need.
Yeah, but today I just want to mostly focus on the conversion from paganism to Christianity, specifically in Ireland, because anything outside of Ireland isn't my field of expertise. So I want to focus on Ireland today. But of course, anything within that topic would be more than welcoming to kind of elaborate on. But just remember, our field of expertise is Irish medieval history. So just be aware of that before we start elaborating on this stuff, because I do feel the problem is that people are confusing the likes of Charlemagne's genocide or the genocide of the Crusades. Somebody highlighted there what happened in Lithuania and Poland during the late medieval period with the Teutonic Knights. And I think that's where a lot of these problems are coming from, is that people are reading what Charlemagne did and what the Teutonic Knights did, and then and this is the key thing that I highlight here, assuming many of you are assuming that what happened in Poland and Lithuania in the late medieval period and what happened in Charlemagne up in the Saxon area in the early medieval period, that perhaps that happened in Ireland. And I can't find any evidence of this. Like, I literally can't find anything to do with that when I was going through all of the sources.
No. I disagree. There's nothing there.
So yeah, just to elaborate on stuff like that. If you have the impression that because of the genocides happening within Charlemagne or over with the Polish-Lithuanian, that happened over in Ireland, it didn't. Like, as I said there in my earlier presentation, it is a case of converting from. It's not a sudden thing. You see that in 536 with the arrival of St. Patrick, that even before the arrival of St. Patrick, we have the indication of St. Palladius, who's a bishop, by the way, who came from Rome to Ireland. Now, the fact that he is a bishop who came to Ireland indicates that there was already Christians in Ireland, because you wouldn't just send a bishop straight away to Ireland. They'd have to be a community already in Ireland for them to send the bishop. That indicates that perhaps missionaries were already sent to Ireland, or, as Mihal had highlighted earlier, that because of the interactions happening between various educated Irish people going into the Roman Empire, and also indications of Irish people wanting to do military service in Rome, that because of that interaction, that they had brought back Christian ideas into Ireland, and that had started up a Christian community in Ireland, which eventually brought in the likes of Palladius, and then later on St. Patrick going into the likes of the Nail territories to further develop this Christian identity in Ireland.
Just in relation, the last comment that you put up, forcible conversion does not equal genocide. Like, I know that I was going to say King Alfred, when he won this major battle, the Norse king submitted to him and agreed to become Christian. But if we look, for example, at the early modern period, Henry VIII picks a fight with Rome because they won't let him divorce, and he converts England. That's never referred to as forcibly converting, but that's what it was. And that was in the early 1530s. But they reckon, for example, the north of England, Yorkshire, etc., was strongly Catholic until the 1590s. And the same happens in France. Henry IV, he basically wins the wars of religion. He can't capture Paris, so he's forced to convert to Catholicism. And when various kings during the wars of religion, during the Reformation, when they decide to go to one side or the other, they flip their country. With the exception, Ireland is almost the only exception at this period, not to where the opposite, where that doesn't happen, where the Irish people, for various reasons, although the official church changed from Catholic to Protestant, the Irish people remain Catholic.
There's a comment there. Just when you were talking about, Philip, about the origins and stuff that I sort of touched on by Dan Breen there. He says, yes, I believe St. Declan was in Waterford for St. Patrick. He was from Ardmore. Yes, see, there's a lot of pre-patrician saints mentioned, like St. Kieran the Elder, Declan of Ardmore, Alvi of Emly, Ibar, MacLugna, and St. Aben. They are pre-patrician saints, but you've got to remember that they're just because they are said in there, sort of that they are possibly pre-patrician saints, because when Saint Patrick and Bridget were going to war to be the head church or the head saint of Ireland, other monastic sites threw in their lots as well, including these names. And they would say that, St. Declan was here way before St. Patrick. So just because their local diocese or local churches claim them to be pre-patrician saints, the chances of them being, I haven't researched each one, but I know just as a generic argument against the pre-patrician sort of statement is that a lot of it was used as sort of propaganda. So when as I said, when Patrick and Bridget were fighting each other where the churches were fighting each other to be the head saint, other churches obviously shot their chance at the big prize, including some of these saints I just mentioned here. And again, so they are a later fabrication that they are pre-Patrick. Not all of them, I don't know, I haven't researched it, but a lot of them are myth.
Fascinating. Just getting back into the comment section again. What's the difference between the Knights Templars and the Knights Hospitallers? The Templars were good guys, I think. Simply, were they? Well, it's depends on your interpretation of good and evil, I suppose. But maybe these guys will elaborate on this still further. But I kind of just know the very basic differences between the Knights Templars and Knights Hospitallers. Of course, the difference being Knights Hospitallers had a black tunic, where Knights Templars had the old white tunic. But further elaborating on that, the Knights Hospitallers were specialized more on hospitals and stuff, and kind of the healing on the front lines and stuff, especially after the First Crusade. They kind of ends up building hospitals for Christians and stuff, and that's where they kind of got their identity of the Knights Hospitallers. From my knowledge, no, I'm not linguistic on this, is that hospitaller and hospital are play on words of each other. Now, to jump over to the Knights Templars, now originally Knights Templars were there to protect pilgrims making their way from Europe into the Holy Lands, because there's plenty of bandits on the roads, especially going from the Constantinople region into Turkey. Because of the amount of nomads you have around that area, pilgrims were kind of open to attack and stuff, and then going into Jerusalem. But then the Knights Templars kind of built upon that, and they ended up starting up the first banking system, because of the fact that they had a system where you would give them all your money, and then they would give you a token, a piece of paper in return. And then when you made it over to the Holy Lands, you could exchange this token to get a bit of your money or whatnot, but you didn't get your full receipt until you went back, you got back home and you were able to give the Knights Templar back the token, and then he'd be able to give you not just all your stuff back, but also your land. You could put your land into the Knights Templars bank as well. Now, this is also how the Knights Templars made a lot of money, because a lot of people didn't return from the Holy Lands, which means the Knights Templars kind of held on to it, and sometimes perhaps even got into a few legal issues later on. Is there anything with that you guys want to elaborate on with the differences between the Knights Hospitallers and the Knights Templars?
I think you should also add in that there were lots and lots of different orders. Like if you talk about Portuguese history, for example, it was the Knights of Aviz were the big guy, were some of the big guys because they were connected with some of the kings. None of them were good guys. Well, maybe some of them were good guys, but most of the time, they were sort of people.
They enjoyed a bit of red lust, a wee bit.
Yeah. Sort of.
They were as good guys as knights were chivalrous. Shall we just say that?
If you were a poor peasant, whether it was Knights Hospitaller, Templars, Teutonic Knights, or any of the Knights of Malta, though I think that name, they're the Hospitallers, whatever.
Yeah, they're a branch off them at least.
They'd all be equally annoying.
Okay. It's pretty well. Just let me go through this one.
It's there about Yola.
Yola. What's Yola? I thought he was just joking. What's the story of Yola?
Wexford dialect, isn't it?
It's more than dialect, because a lot of the settlers who moved into Wexford were originally Flemings. So it's kind of a mixture of English, Old English with Flemish, and it lasted as a separate. It was in Wexford, I think, in the Bargy barony. Certainly, some of the people who came out in 1798 spoke Yola. It doesn't exist anymore. I think it died out well over 100 years ago. But if you go on YouTube and type in Yola, there are a couple of songs that they kept in the Yola language, so you can actually see it written down. So they have some knowledge about it. I think Fingalian was something in North County Dublin somewhat similar.
Yeah, there was dialects.
Dan Bean is throwing in the two Fort and Bargy.
Yeah, there was a number of dialects that sort of existed all over Ireland. We had a few in South Ulster as well, in the medieval period, that sort of existed in wee pockets. Leinster as well, like I said, Fingalian is one of them. Wherever you find these hotspots of settlement from different migratory groups, you would find these sort of wee dialects sort of existing, but very localized. Which is why the fact you could put the Forth and Bargy for the two locations for this dialect, whereas dialects today can obviously branch outside of traditional county lines, like or parish lines. But you already answered about the dialect. I always thought it was a dialect, but if it's a distinct Middle English language.
And just to be clear with that, these dialects that were coming in, I'm assuming that a lot of them came in with the quote-unquote Norman invasion, and that's why people are getting more and more hesitant in referring to the invasion of 1169 and 1171 as a Norman invasion, because of how mixed this group was that was penetrating into Ireland.
I think they came in a century or two later, when things were quieter. So settlers came over. Settlers came over.
I think Sean Duffy has already, the historian Sean Duffy has stated that the original Welsh retinue of the Norman Knights, so the Norman Knights who came across in 1169, obviously they were granted their lands, but they brought retinues with them: bowmen, archers, foot soldiers who were given parts of lands, like middle level sergeants and stuff like that. But those settlements, the original Welsh retinues settlements, failed, and a lot of them returned back to Wales. So you don't actually, but obviously the Normans still exist, and their knights still exist. Like the butlers with their Purcell knights and stuff like that. So a lot of the higher echelons still existed, but the lower class didn't. So it was later on, like Owen has said, as things started to settle in these now being settled locations, have been owned by Norman families for a century or so. They could start moving in, the individuals they needed into these areas. But Sean Duffy does make a statement that the original settlements did fail.
Because I know Sean Duffy's going to, well, he's in the middle of elaborating on that one with the newest one that's coming out, which is Invasions Ireland 1169, which is going to be a whole book of papers which are going to be brought out. I think originally it was meant to come out this year. It's going to be on 4 courts. Let me quickly actually look that one up for you guys so I can give the actual date of release that's put in right now, because I think that was supposed to come out this year, but now it's coming out next year, where Sean Duffy is going to elaborate on a lot of this stuff. So if you guys want a book to be eaten, all that kind of stuff, wait until next year. Let me actually quickly look that date up as the other 2 lads entertain you, and I'll post that up. Is there any other question you want me to highlight there? Yeah. Do a dance there. Ellis Kettler, she's always good and entertaining. Here, you guys have that.
I can't juggle, so unfortunately. No. Let me see if I've seen any other questions here that we were sort of going through. Oh, get close to my bedtime.
We'll finish up there in a second. If you guys have any last questions there before I post up, what was it called? That thing, definitely post it below, and we'll finish up there, because this has been going on for 2 hours and a half, and the lads are starting to get hanging there. It's great for me. It's early morning for me, so I can literally talk all morning about this. So do you guys have any more last questions there before we finish up? And just let me very, very quickly, I found it. Finally found it. Actually, I'll just see if I can just send the link up for you guys. That book is going to come out on April 2026, Invasions 1169, which the main editor there is Sean Duffy. So if you want a book there to elaborate on all of that stuff and all the politics and stuff that's happening, there you go. Invasions, and that's the name of it as well. And that's going to come out next year. Oh yeah, that was the one. Sorry about that. You guys asked me that one earlier as well, on the wolves in medieval Ireland. Were they a major hazard for the people? Yeah, sorry about that. I actually seen that earlier, and I was actually meant to answer that one, and then I suddenly got bombarded. Yeah, it's an interesting one. There is actually plenty. It seems to me, looking at the likes of the Finn cycle and stuff, and the other Irish literature, that wolves seem to be a constant hazard to cattle raiders as they're sneaking around the forest and stuff, because the stories like Cuchulainn and stuff seem to indicate a little bit of a fear to wolves. And then as we go into the likes of the Desmond Fitzgerald and stuff, you have Kilmallock, which got cleansed after the war by wolves. So it seems to be that wolves seem to be a constant threat around the forest area, from my interpretation. Go on.
When you're right, like in the Elizabethan period, when they're using wolves, etc., you have to take that with a huge grain of salt, because they throw in wolves to create the idea that the Irish are savages. Sort of, and the wolf has this sort of meaning of something bad in Western Europe for a lot of the time. There were many wolves, but I don't know how many there were. There probably weren't that many, because just the land couldn't hold it. Ecologically, they are probably good in keeping deer numbers down, because I know where I lived, I can carry the deer there's an urgent need for wolves. The farmers would shoot me for saying that, but the deer are expanding everywhere. So a wolf is an easy symbol to use. Yes, they probably would come out and eat dead people, but I don't think they were much of a particular hazard. They were sort of, everybody, so many stories, sort of Little Red Riding Hood, all this, the big bad wolf. So the wolf is a symbolic baddie. But how many people in Europe were killed by wolves over the last 1,000 years? Probably not that many. And I don't think Ireland was particularly different.
Yeah, I definitely 100% agree with that, because you can see that with Gerald of Wales's topography of Ireland, where he constantly compares the men of Usherga to wolves as well. Literally, I think at some stage he literally just calls them wolves, and he definitely has that depiction of a man that looks like a cattle raider, because he's dressed very similar to the Book of Kells Irish warrior as well. So I assume he is a kern, a cattle raider, and he's very much compared to wolves as well. And we can kind of see that indication as well in the Finn cycle, where there's this comparison between wolves and cattle raiders living inside of the forest lines and stuff. So there's definitely something that Gerald of Wales is working upon, but he's still playing it in a kind of, well, if they're playing around with wolves, they must be, and behaving like wolves as well, because he highlights that kind of animal topography a lot, is this whole idea of, Fenians and wolves and Irish people and wolves. Even like there's even a point where he has a depiction of a woman getting off with a animal as well. So he definitely uses that kind of animal topography as an evil thing. Well, definitely a barbaric thing, and wolves is a very negative, evil thing as well.
The famous quote, "They came like wolves out of the sea." I could be wrong. I think it could have been from Bede, referring to the Saxons arriving, attacking or landing, whatever, Roman Britain or post-Roman Britain, or it could have been about the Vikings. But I have a feeling it's about the Saxons, and it's in quite a famous text, maybe either Bede or the Saxon Chronicle. So the use of describing an enemy that you don't like as savage, as barbarian, as a wolf, goes back a long, long time in Western Europe.
Definitely fascinating, and God, we could literally talk about this all night. Very, very good comment to finish up on. More cattle raiding stories, please. And you know what? Maybe I'll talk with other lads as well, because there's another topic we might cover next week. But at some stage, cattle raiding is definitely something I really, really would love to cover some stage, perhaps just before Halloween, or just coming up around November or something around there as well. We might cover cattle raiding there as well. So at some stage as a topic, I would absolutely love to cover cattle raiding.
We could set up a cattle raiding camp.
Oh yeah. Here, Ian, don't tempt me, because I do the living history, and I would love to set up a cattle raiding camp at some stage, somewhere around the summer months and stuff. You're giving me way too many ideas. I'd record that as well. No problems. I just have to make I have all my my early medieval kit at home as well. So when I get home, I could actually do it. Right, you're sparking ideas. Anyway, I'll finish up there, guys, before I talk all about cows for the rest of the night.
Not to be shot by farmers. Not to be shot by farmers. I don't think they'll be very happy.
No. They'd have to get used to it now, especially when I return. Regardless, guys, I could literally talk about cattle all night, but we'll have to finish up here, especially since the two boys are getting a bit sleepy. But other than that, guys, definitely go over to Micheál and Owen O'Neill's channels. Their literal names are below their titles, so definitely head over there. If as well you want me to elaborate still further, this Sunday, head over to my Patreon. It's about 20 quid a month, where I'm going to be talking about the Siege of Dublin. You keep harassing, you keep asking over and over again, Philip, cover the Siege of Dublin. I'm doing it this weekend. Stop panicking. So if you want to go and listen to that, even the recording, because I'm recording a lot of this stuff as well, and it's on my Patreon, head over to my Patreon. It's about 20 quid a month. Definitely worth the price. So definitely go over there. And also, if you just want to support the channel, have an old nosy at my Patreon anyway. It's about 3 quid a month. If you just want to support the channel, that's fair enough. Micheál, is there anything that's upcoming, or any way people could support you as well?
There's I don't know about upcoming because I recently lost my phone, which had 2 years worth of research, and I know I literally had four or five complete videos ready to go
Jesus.
with a lot of research, and I mean a lot, including a list of every Earner family, which is every family linked to the monastic sites in Ireland, and their churches, which I have lost. So at the minute, I'm contemplating whether
Life.
But so I don't know where I'm at the minute, but I will probably post some stuff just to keep me busy till I figure out what I'm going to do. So just keep an eye on TikTok and keep an eye on YouTube.
Happy days. And financially, is there any way, people can support you financially as well, Michal?
Just again, memberships on YouTube, memberships on TikTok. I will say it's cheaper on YouTube. There's a cheaper subscription there. And Seamus says, I got drunk one night, no doubt. No. When I say I lost my phone, I mean it broke. And but my memberships don't pay for drinks. They pay for books. So
Nice.
That's my drug.
Owen O'Neill, what do you have upcoming, and also how can people support you financially?
Okay, in the next few days, I will have a video on Glendalough, because I managed to visit it about a month ago on a nice, reasonably sunny day, one of the few during the summer. So I'm hoping that will come out Saturday or Sunday. And then next Monday or Tuesday, I'll have my own question and answers for an hour. As regards support, I have a Buy Me a Coffee account, which is, you can see it on all my videos on YouTube or YouTube Thanks. I haven't got as far as setting up Patreon or anything like that. Or subscribe and watch the videos and share them, please.
Ian, what are you doing? You need to set up a Patreon and start getting classes up and going.
I know. I'm busy.
Yeah, it's very bad. Michal, what the hell are you looking up there? I saw poor Owen trying to advertise himself, and there you are in the background. Researching.
Sorry. No, I was replying to a comment. I was trying to do it stealthily, but obviously my microphone is right next to my keyboard.
I was like, what the hell is he trying to research while Ian's trying to talk? Jesus Christ. But other than that, guys, thanks so much for all the support and the commitment. And even just watching this gives us, well, not me, because I'm, what was it called, blocked by YouTube right now. But the rest of the lads get ad support and stuff. So definitely thank you so much for all the support. And other than that, guys, thanks very much. And slán go Alia. See you.